Under the moonlight, the military camp remains silent before the great battle, with soldiers patrolling the area around the campfires. Meanwhile, the young warrior carefully cleans his blade, reminding himself that this weapon is proof of his loyalty. For someone who swore his life to Lord Atlas, his entire existence is tied to the edge of that sword. This is Zeno, a quiet and focused swordsman, marked by scars across his face and blind devotion to the man who took him in. Suddenly, a firm voice calls his name from the entrance of the tent, interrupting his preparations for dawn. Standing before him is Lord Atlas, wearing silver armor and bringing orders for the coming battle. Atlas warns that they will march at dawn and orders Zeno to lead the vanguard and break through the center of the enemy lines. On top of that, his mission is to bring back the head of the rival general, Garzas, for the glory of House Arclight. With a cold order not to fail, the commander makes the weight of the responsibility placed on him perfectly clear. Looking at Atlas, Zeno remembers the snowy day when he was on the verge of death and the Lord rescued him. Atlas was the one who reached out to him, gave him food when he was at his limit, and offered him a reason to keep living. From that moment on, the boy carried a deep sense of gratitude toward the man who changed his fate. Because of that depth, Zeno truly believes his life belongs to the man who saved him. Back in the present, he opens his eyes with determination, showing no hesitation toward the dangerous order he just received. Bowing respectfully, Zeno firmly replies that he will carry out everything exactly as his lord wishes. Satisfied with his answer, Atlas turns around and leaves the tent, leaving the swordsman alone to make his final preparations. With his blade in hand, Zeno knows his performance on the front line will be decisive in that battle. When the fighting begins, he charges across the battlefield, cutting through enemy troops in a fierce assault. With a series of strikes, he carves a path straight through the enemy soldiers in a storm of slashes. Focused only on completing his mission, Zeno moves with precision as enemy blood spreads across the battlefield. Within seconds, he leaves several bodies behind and maintains his position on the front line. The brief calm ends when the thunder of hooves signals another charge approaching. A heavily armored cavalry unit appears at full speed, charging straight toward him with their lances aimed to crush him. The leader of the cavalry charges forward with a smile, certain he can run down the lone swordsman without any trouble. But Zeno remembers everything he has accomplished to honor the name of House Arclight, even if doing so meant coughing up blood and pushing his own body to the limit in every battle. His technique was born from that loyalty, forged at the cost of slowly consuming his own soul. Concentrating all his power into a single point on his sword, he lowers his body and takes an attacking stance. With a confident smile and a sharp gaze, Zeno unleashes his secret technique, Phantom Shadow. In a fraction of a second, the technique distorts the space around him and intercepts the cavalry before impact. A brutal slash tears through the formation, while Zeno continues walking among the fallen riders. From a distance, Arclight's soldiers mock his monstrous swordsmanship, saying that style does not belong to the noble family. The price of such an aggressive technique shows itself moments later when Zeno starts coughing up blood. Exhausted, he drops to his knees while the allied nobles order everyone to stay away so they will not get dirty touching that piece of trash. Still trying to catch his breath, Zeno's eyes widen when he feels another heavy tremor coming through the ground. Panting and covered in sweat, he realizes the danger still is not over. An entire second wave of enemy cavalry appears on the horizon and charges toward him at full speed. With the enemy closing in and his allies still standing by, Zeno realizes the situation has become terrible. Staring at his blade covered in dark mist, he calculates that he can only use Phantom Shadow one more time before collapsing. With no support at all, Zeno takes a deep breath and prepares to face the entire unit alone once again. From the top of a cliff, Lord Atlas watches everything from horseback, coldly observing Zeno's battle. Showing no intention of sending reinforcements, the commander simply stares down at his already exhausted subordinate. Even with blood covering his mouth and his body exhausted, Zeno grits his teeth and refuses to give up. Taking another step toward danger, he repeats to himself that he will complete the order no matter the cost. Facing an army beneath the distant gaze of his master, Zeno is willing to fight until the end, even if it costs him his life. Meanwhile, Atlas continues carefully watching every move the young man makes on the battlefield. Consumed by devotion, Zeno charges in the enemy cavalry, convinced that everything he does is for his lord. From above, Atlas merely narrows his eyes as he sees everything unfolding exactly as he predicted. During Zeno's advance, a strange golden light begins shining through his dark aura. Realizing the warrior is about to stop being useful as a tool, Atlas decides that the time has come to act. With a gesture, he gives the order, and his subordinates activate a dark talisman filled with forbidden magic. Dark energy explodes across the battlefield, catching Zeno by surprise in the middle of his charge. Bound by magical chains, he recognizes the dreaded black imprisonment formation in shock. Immobilized and unable to understand anything, Zeno shouts, trying to figure out why this is happening. The curse spreads across the young man's face, forcibly seals his powers, and burns his skin. The ceiling strikes his entire body, making Zeno cough up blood as his strength begins to fade. Overwhelmed by pain, he writhes under the effects of the magic as his body loses strength. With Zeno defenseless, an enemy warrior approaches wielding a massive battle axe. Calling the young man a monster, the soldier raises his weapon to deliver a fatal blow. The axe violently strikes Zeno across the back, sending blood spraying as he screams in pain. Laughing, the attacker reveals that he is only following the agreement he made with Zeno's master and tells him to save his resentment for Atlas. Lying on the ground and bleeding, Zeno is stunned by the revelation, unable to understand why the man he trusted would do this. Hearing metallic footsteps approaching, he forces his blurry vision to focus on whoever is coming. A figure in silver armor stops in front of him, casting a shadow over his wounded body. It is Lord Atlas, who coldly calls the name of the swordsman lying in a pool of blood. With tears in his eyes, Zeno stares at the man he always treated as his only family. Without hesitation, Atlas tells him that his role ends here. Coughing up blood and still in shock, Zeno can barely ask why he is being betrayed. Desperate, he reaches out his hand, calls Atlas his father, and begs for an explanation. The commander responds with a cold stare and tells the orphan to get that ridiculous idea out of his head. Atlas says he never once considered Zeno his real son. Not even for a second did he feel affection for the boy, who now sees his own reflection in the pool of blood. Atlas then reveals that on that snowy day, when he found the nearly dead child, he only had one thought. The memory shows the moment he found little Zeno dying on the frozen ground. At that moment, all Atlas saw was the potential for the perfect tool of war. All he had to do was give the boy a reason to live, and Zeno would offer him blind loyalty for the rest of his life. A convenient disposable sword that could take on the most dangerous battles in his place. The only problem, according to Atlas, was that the tool ended up becoming far too powerful. Even as a child, Zeno already showed an abnormal amount of spiritual energy. That was exactly why Atlas spent years poisoning him and suppressing the boy's true power. He explains that he used poison to restrain that power, while Zeno unknowingly drank it, all believing it was medicine. Atlas adds that he had finally reached the limit, and the glow from earlier was proof that Zeno's energy was beginning to overflow. Afraid the young man might someday turn against him, Atlas decided to kill him, making Zeno swear that he would never even think of betraying him. With his blood-covered hand still extended, the young man shouts that he would never do anything against the man he loves so much. Without any mercy, the enemy soldier steps on Zeno's outstretched arm and crushes his bones against the ground. Atlas tells the soldier to stop making so much noise and says he will explain the true meaning of the name the young man received in that household. Looking at Zeno with contempt, he reveals that the name simply means disposable sword. At once, the nobles and soldiers of Arclight begin laughing at the swordsman's naivety. The enemy soldier takes the opportunity to kick Zeno in the head, driving his face into the pool of blood. With his face pressed against the cold ground, the boy feels the last of his strength beginning to disappear. In his final thoughts, Zeno regrets dedicating his entire life and every swing of his sword to such a cruel man. He gave all his loyalty to Atlas, and in return, he received nothing but betrayal and contempt. The executioner raises the axe once again to strike the young man's defenseless body, but the attackers are startled when they realize Zeno is still trying to move, even while standing at death's door. Crawling through his own blood, he grips his blade one last time and begins murmuring the name of his technique. A golden spark appears in his eyes as Zeno still refuses to accept that ending. But his body is already too damaged to continue, and his vision begins to fade. Unable to complete the attack, Zeno collapses onto his blade and succumbs to his injuries. The enemy soldier laughs in relief beside Arclight's leader, admitting that the young man's persistence actually scared him for a moment. Calling Zeno a stupid monster, he prepares the final blow, while the young man thinks about the empty life he lived. Bitterly, Zeno realizes the only reason he was ever given to live was to serve as a disposable tool until his death. An object created to be used on the battlefield and thrown away once it was no longer useful. Just before closing his eyes forever, one final question crosses his mind: what was all that effort even for? But suddenly, a warm sensation surrounds him, and when he opens his eyes, he sees the crest of the Elminster family, the most powerful mages on the continent. A delicate hand gently strokes the blanket as a sweet voice tells him that he has finally woken up. A noble woman with golden hair smiles affectionately and calls the child in her arms her sweet baby. Zeno's golden eyes widen, unable to believe he's just been reborn in the body of a baby. Looking up at the ceiling of the luxurious room, he tries to understand the absurd situation he finds himself in. When he tries moving his hands, he finds tiny, chubby arms, confirming that this is not an illusion. In the woman's arms, he desperately tries to understand how he ended up there after dying. In that world, the empire is divided between two great powers: House Arclight, which considers swordsmanship the ultimate power, and the legendary Elminster family, which sees magic as the ultimate form of strength. According to legend, the founder of the Elminsters could raise continents with a single spell and possessed energy comparable to the sun itself. To him, it is almost ironic that he dedicated his entire life to the sword only to be reborn into the opposing bloodline. While his mother sleeps beside him, the little boy feels something pulsing powerfully inside his chest. An overwhelming flow rushes through his body, making him prop himself up on the bed in surprise at the sensation. The glow returns to his eyes when he recognizes the familiar energy that had always been suppressed. A massive vortex of spiritual energy begins forming around his tiny body. Zeno realizes this is the true power Lord Atlas had been poisoning and stealing from him in his previous life. With a confident smile, he concludes that the heavens have not abandoned him and have given him another chance for revenge. He realizes he has been reborn into the perfect environment and one of the most influential bloodlines he could have hoped for. With an enormous reserve of spiritual energy, he decides to take full advantage of every resource this new life offers. His goal now is to gather enough power to take revenge on Lord Atlas for his betrayal. But before that, he knows he will need to learn how to control all the power he inherited from the Elminster family. However, the plan begins very differently from what he expected, with the boy receiving an absurd amount of pampering from the servants. A crowd of servants and cooks gathers inside the room to fuss over the young heir. Excited, the head chef approaches and says he prepared a special meal for young Master Lucius. Proudly, he explains that it is magical baby food made from sap harvested directly from the legendary world tree. Lucius panics when the chef tries to make him open his mouth and drink the food from a bottle. Before that can happen, a red-haired maid pushes the man away and offers Lucius a rattle infused with the magical energy of all the maids. Apparently, the maid spent the entire night performing a ritual to enchant that toy. The maid and the chef immediately start arguing, leaving Lucius completely unsure how to react to the madness. His mother finds the commotion amusing and affectionately adjusts her son's blanket. In a calm voice, she asks everyone to settle down so they do not frighten Lucius with all the commotion. Then she smiles at the child in her arms and affectionately asks if he agrees. As his head is gently stroked, Lucius tries to keep a clear mind so he will not get carried away by all that affection. He remembers very well how he was treated like trash when he was still an orphan in his previous life. To Lucius, all that affection only exists because of his talent and the enormous magical potential he possesses. After being betrayed and left to die, he refuses to give himself false hope about familial love. When he simply rolls over in bed, the maids celebrate like he accomplished something incredible, while Lucius decides to use this environment for his revenge. A week passes since his reincarnation, and during that time, he has already gained a good understanding of how the mansion works. Alone in his room at night, Lucius drinks from his bottle while thinking about the lifestyle of noble mages. He quickly realizes that the Elminster family's methods of raising and training children surpass anything he ever imagined. Even a simple bottle of milk is prepared with an enormous amount of spiritual energy concentrated by the maids. The maids even become visibly exhausted after infusing so much mana into the baby's daily meals. On top of that, his mother's lullabies subtly teach some of the most complex rules of magical enchantment. Little by little, Lucius adapts to the routine of playing with magical artifacts under the watchful eyes of the maids. Even though he finds it strange having to act like an ordinary baby, he decides he cannot keep wasting time. Raising his tiny hand in the darkness, he decides to test just how far his current power can go. He remembers that the essence of Phantom Shadow is condensing all spiritual energy into a single point. Just as he once did with his sword, Lucius tries to recreate the technique using the mana flowing through his new body. Concentrating, he tries to gather and control every drop of that enormous amount of spiritual energy. But the power inside him is so great that his tiny body can barely withstand the pressure. In an instant, a beam of light shoots from his hand, pierces through the ceiling, and rises into the sky. The bluish pillar erupts from the top of the castle and illuminates the entire estate in the middle of the night. The tremor is so strong that the cooks panic, thinking the castle is under attack. Terrified by the sudden explosion of energy, his mother runs through the halls alongside the maid to check on her son. The magical beam shines so intensely that it can be seen throughout the entire city, drawing the attention of the whole region. Lying in bed, Lucius is stunned when he realizes how much his spiritual energy has developed in only 1 week. With his eyes glowing, he smiles as he finally understands the level of power he now has at his disposal. Panting and covered in cold sweat, Lucius also realizes that controlling all that energy will not be easy. At the same time, hurried footsteps echo through the hallway as his mother and the maid race toward the room. The noblewoman bursts through the door in panic, calls out for her son, and asks what caused that massive noise. But when the two enter, they find the room completely silent with no obvious sign of destruction. Lucius pretends to be deeply asleep, making his mother wonder if perhaps she had only imagined everything. Relieved, she sits beside the crib and looks affectionately at the boy, wondering what kind of dream he might be having. The next morning, the woman peacefully rocks the baby in a chair while enjoying the sunlight. The peaceful moment ends when the red-haired maid bursts into the room screaming in complete panic. Out of breath, Fran tries to warn them that terrible and urgent news has just arrived at the estate. Still holding Lucius in her arms, the noblewoman asks the maid to calm down and explain what happened. Fran reveals that a delegation from the royal guard has arrived at the gates with an evaluator sent directly by the imperial court. The news surprises his mother, while Lucius frowns as he feels the tension spreading through the room. She cannot understand why a royal delegation would arrive unannounced in such a distant territory, especially with the patriarch away. Lucius puts the pieces together and figures the court detected the mana explosion from the previous night, which makes the situation much more complicated. Shortly afterward, all the mansion's servants are gathered inside the grand hall to receive the imperial authorities. Holding her son in her arms, the lady tries to hide her nervousness during the unexpected inspection. The doors open, a hooded figure enters accompanied by 2 guards, carrying an intimidating presence. Lady Elminster rises to receive them and faces the newcomers with a firm and protective demeanor. The mysterious man walks through the hall, drawing the tense gazes of every employee. Sensing danger, the woman holds Lucius tighter against her chest, while the baby silently watches everything. Breaking the tense atmosphere, the man in the black cloak addresses the matriarch in a cold and authoritative tone. Without wasting time on pleasantries, he tells her that he is there to carry out a decree issued directly by the Empire. The visitor explains that the previous night, the capital's spiritual surveillance network detected a terrifying anomaly. A colossal torrent of magical energy appeared in that territory, something he claims only happens once every 1,000 years. Pointing toward the hall, he confidently states that the source of that energy is somewhere inside. The evaluator takes another step and insists that the source is hidden inside the Elminster mansion. Looking over the staff, he tries to determine where such unbelievable power could have come from. In a threatening tone, he makes it clear that if the evaluation shows the energy poses a risk to the Empire, they will have to immediately purify the target without any mercy. Fran is shocked when she hears the word purification and realizes someone's life may be in danger. The officer remains unmoved and says that this is simply the duty of his imperial position. He then raises an ornate golden crystal sphere, revealing the instrument used to measure magic. With the artifact in hand, he begins walking through the hall among the nobles and servants. The device spins faster and faster, indicating that the unknown source is somewhere inside that very room. A constant metallic noise accompanies the mechanism as it tracks traces of mana throughout the room. Suddenly, the sphere reacts violently and shines brightly, locking onto a single point. A beam of light shoots from the artifact and points directly toward the mother holding Lucius. The evaluator turns toward the golden-haired lady and calls her name suspiciously. With a slight smile, he politely asks her to step forward so she can be examined. Swallowing nervously, the noblewoman holds the baby tighter against her chest and agrees, fearing what might happen. Before stepping forward, Lady Elminster carefully hands Lucius to a maid and asks her to take care of him. With an elegant posture, the noblewoman steps forward and stands before the imperial evaluator. The man activates the artifact over her, and the sphere gives off only a soft and stable golden glow. After examining the reading, the officer immediately realizes she is not the source of the colossal anomaly. Intrigued, he narrows his eyes and tries to figure out where that absurd amount of power is coming from. Suddenly, the sphere reacts violently and begins releasing sparks in his hands. The mechanism spins out of control, building up more and more light in the center of the hall. In the blink of an eye, a golden beam shoots across the entire hall, passing over all the nobles present. The energy locks directly onto the maid holding Lucius. The evaluator quickly turns toward the back of the room, his dark cloak following the movement. Staring at the child, his eyes widen when he realizes what is happening. The spiritual pressure is so intense that the crystal begins creaking and cracking during the measurement. Unable to withstand the overload, the artifact explodes into dozens of pieces in the officer's hand. Shards of glass and gold scatter through the air in front of Lucius's calm gaze. Stunned, the evaluator struggles to believe what just happened. His mother and all the servants panic when they see the sacred artifact destroyed like that. Still in shock, the man points at the child and asks if that baby is really the source of all that power. He stammers that this should be impossible, because no ordinary living being could accumulate that much mana. After all, that treasure was considered indestructible even by first-class mages, yet it shattered from nothing more than the child's spiritual pressure. Lucius meets his gaze with his golden eyes without showing any fear. Determined to understand what is happening, the evaluator removes his hood and says he will connect his own soul to the boy's. Opening a spiritual magic circle, the mage tries to enter the child's mind and discover his true nature. But the moment he touches Lucius's consciousness, he receives an overwhelming counterattack that burns his hand. The rejection is so powerful that he stumbles backward, stunned by the resistance of the baby's soul. When he tries to see beyond that barrier, the officer is terrified by what appears before him. A colossal storm of golden spiritual fire covers everything, preventing him from even reaching the core of that soul. The energy is so intense that it feels like staring directly at the sun from only a few feet away. But at the center of that glow, he senses a dark and cursed presence pulsing inside the boy. Back in reality, with his face pale, the evaluator is questioned by Lady Elminster about what he saw. His mother and the maids anxiously wait for an answer, fearing the verdict regarding Lucius. With a serious expression, the man begins explaining the true purpose of the Imperial Court's evaluators. He reveals that the order has existed since the birth of the Empire to prevent an ancient prophecy from coming true. According to a sacred book, one day the greatest and most devastating calamity in history will appear. The prophecy says that the one who carries the curse of the abyss within a sacred soul will bring chaos and plunge the Empire into darkness. Looking at the mother, the evaluator says the baby's soul matches the description of that prophecy exactly. The noblewoman and the maid are horrified and refuse to accept that Lucius could be a threat. Ignoring their pleas, the mage declares that by the authority of the imperial family, that spark of destruction must be contained. At his command, the guards move forward to eliminate the danger right there before the curse has a chance to grow. But Lady Elminster and her servants immediately change their stance, making it clear that they will not hand over the child without a fight. In the maid's arms, Lucius watches everything with a sharp gaze, ready to react to any threat. The imperial guards move toward the maid while Lucius begins concentrating mana into his hand to defend himself. One of the soldiers draws his sword without hesitation, clearly showing his intention to attack the child. But before any strike can be made, the matriarch raises her voice and orders everyone to stop. In an instant, a massive wave of pink energy erupts around her and paralyzes the evaluator. Large magical wings spread behind the woman as she declares that she will not allow anyone to touch her son. With a firm gaze, the lady makes it clear that she is willing to go all the way to protect Lucius. The hooded man narrows his eyes and asks if she truly intends to defy the laws of the Empire. Without backing down, the mother replies that a single tear from her son is worth more to her than any imperial law. To Celestia, risking everything and standing against the entire world is exactly what it means to be a mother. In the maid's arms, Lucius is left speechless by a declaration of love he never received in his previous life. The imperial envoy maintains his serious expression and asks if she is truly prepared to face the consequences of that choice. The pressure from the two magical forces collides inside the hall, creating a powerful wind that makes the entire room tremble. The two hold each other's gaze, and neither seems willing to give in. To everyone's surprise, the evaluator begins withdrawing his aura and disperses the energy gathered in his hands. The Imperial guards are completely confused when they see their leader suddenly back down. One of them demands to know if the officer intends to ignore the decree and let that threat go free. The braided-haired man remains silent for a moment, thinking about the true purpose of the laws and the prophecy. He remembers that the order is to eliminate the danger at its roots, but wonders whether a seed raised with so much love would truly become a calamity. Watching Lady Celestia stand there with her shining wings, the officer reaches an unexpected decision. He declares that he has decided to see with his own eyes what kind of future that child will have within the Empire. The mage looks closely at Lucius, exchanging a silent and meaningful stare with the baby. Turning back toward the noblewoman, he formally addresses her as Lady Celestia, the respected daughter of the Duke. Knowing that she is willing to oppose the Empire to protect her son, the man takes an unexpected stance. Closing his eyes, the evaluator says he will join her in that dangerous gamble. The decision visibly surprises Celestia, since she never expected the Imperial envoy to change sides. Even so, he gives her a warning if the boy strays from the right path, the two of them will pay with their own lives. Turning his back on the hall, the officer heads toward the exit with his soldiers and asks if the agreement is clear. Before walking through the door, he stops for a moment and reminds her not to forget their agreement. The massive doors close, and the entire hall is finally overcome with enormous relief. As soon as the threat leaves, Celestia's firm posture collapses under the weight of the tension. Sweat runs down her face as she tries to catch her breath after confronting the Imperial guard. With her legs trembling, the woman nearly falls while trying to remain standing. Desperate to see her son, Celestia rushes toward the maid and reaches out to take him. With trembling hands on the baby's face, she begins crying with relief and thanks the heavens that Lucius is safe. Lucius's golden eyes widen, unsure how to react to such a sincere display of affection. His mother drops to her knees, crying beside the maid and repeating how happy she is that her baby is safe. Tears stream down the woman's face, revealing all the tension she had hidden behind her firm demeanor. She holds Lucius tightly against her chest in a protective embrace, as if nothing else matters at that moment. With his head resting against his mother's shoulder, Lucius finally feels the true warmth of a family for the first time. Inside the Imperial carriage, a guard asks whether sparing the baby was really the right decision, and the evaluator confidently answers that it was. He orders the guard to report everything to the Emperor, saying that they found a genius capable of bringing great benefits to the nation. 12 years pass and Lucius is now grown, standing inside a training chamber surrounded by dozens of magic circles. Bursts of spells are fired from every direction while he remains calm at the center of the suspended platform. With quick reflexes and precise movements, Lucius dodges and neutralizes every attack without difficulty. Feeling his adrenaline rise, he demands even more intensity from the room so he can keep pushing his limits. Lucius knows that pushing his own mind to exhaustion is one of the keys to improving his mana control. In his mind, the closer he gets to his limit during training, the more refined his spiritual energy becomes, allowing him to reach an even greater level of control. Concentrating mana at his fingertips, Lucius ends the session while maintaining complete control over his power. The magical machinery stops, and the dust settles as the young man catches his breath after training. Sitting on the edge of the platform, Lucius wipes the sweat from his face and takes a deep breath. Down below, his mother and Fran watch the boy with a mixture of pride and concern. With her hands clasped together, Lady Celestia affectionately complains that her son has once again been doing that reckless training. Lucius stands on top of the platform and looks down at the two women with a calm expression. With a faint smile, he assures his mother that everything is fine and there is no reason to worry. After all, he has repeated that same rigorous routine every day for the past 12 years. The two are startled when Lucius simply jumps from that height, but he uses the wind and his mana to slow his fall, gently descending toward the floor. Lucius lands directly in front of his mother and Fran, showing the control he has developed over his own body. Proud of his landing, the young man gives him a smug smile and waits for some praise. But Fran immediately freaks out and gives him a serious scolding, saying that the moment he lowers his guard is exactly when he is in the most danger. Lucius tries to calm the maid with an awkward laugh, while Celestia simply watches the argument in amusement. Looking thoughtfully to the side, Lucius remembers that he has patiently waited 12 years for this moment. Fran then changes the subject and addresses the young master with a much more serious expression. Holding out her hands, she gives Lucius a sealed letter bearing the official mark of the Imperial Court. The young man takes the letter and immediately notices the green wax seal protecting the message. As he opens the envelope and unfolds the paper, a spark of ambition appears in his golden eyes. Lucius knows that all the suffering and training up to this day were preparation for this moment. The document is an official invitation to the selection ceremony of the prestigious Royal Academy, where the Empire's greatest young talents gather. Besides its enormous prestige, the top student who graduates from the institution receives a unique reward, a divine blessing capable of surpassing human limits, the same one that allowed Lord Atlas to become practically untouchable. In his previous life, Zeno saw Atlas destroy a deadly attack with nothing but his bare hand. Thanks to that blessing, Arclight's leader possessed strength and regeneration far beyond normal limits. Back then, Zeno watched in amazement as the commander's fatal wounds disappeared within seconds. Clenching the letter between his fingers, Lucius decides that he needs that same blessing to defeat his former master. And to obtain that power and finally begin his revenge, he will have to take first place at the Royal Academy. The scene shifts to the massive arena in the capital, where thousands of nobles and commoners fill the stands for the event. In the section reserved for nobles, Lady Celestia and Fran anxiously watch everything for the boy. Wearing an elegant formal uniform, Lucius enters the field alongside the other candidates. In the audience, the nobles begin whispering, curious to see the abilities of the mysterious Elminster heir. With his eyes fixed on his goal, Lucius waits for the official announcement at the center of the arena. Suddenly, an order echoes through the stadium, and the entire crowd falls silent. The master of ceremonies rises from his box to officially declare the academy's examination open. At the order to begin, the steel gates in the center of the arena open with a thunderous crash. The examiner announces that the practical admission test is about to begin. Lucius keeps his guard up and calmly analyzes the challenge ahead. A roar echoes across the field as a gigantic tail begins slamming against the bars of a cage. The magical beast known as the Crystal Lizard emerges into the arena, beginning the protection and suppression test. The rule is to protect several magical eggs flying through the air at high speed. At the same time, each candidate must subdue the monster without allowing a single egg to break. Their performance will be measured by the mysterious artifact floating above the stadium. It is the legendary Scales of Judgment, a divine instrument used to evaluate the abilities of young candidates. One side measures how well the eggs are protected, while the other records the offensive power used against the beast. Magical weights will be placed on both sides, and the candidate only passes if they reach the required score. Once the explanation is over, the judge orders everyone to head to the waiting area. As Lucius walks through the candidate's corridor, he begins attracting hostile looks and nasty comments from the other nobles. They whisper that he is the cursed child who is only still alive because of the court's mercy. Sitting arrogantly on a throne, a silver-haired young swordsman mocks Lucius, saying he should already be dead. Ignoring all the provocations around him, Lucius remains focused only on his plan. The first candidate called is Lilia Magnet, who enters the arena surrounded by flames. With fire concentrated around her fists, the girl charges at the monster, shouting for it to burn to ashes. The magic hits the lizard directly in the head and creates a thick cloud of smoke. The attack earns a perfect score in offensive power, but her protection of the eggs leaves a lot to be desired. Even so, the Scales of Judgment tip in Lilia's favor, confirming that she passed. Unsatisfied with her own performance, she clicks her tongue while the examiners prepare the creature again. The next candidate enters the field and uses a sphere of purple mana to restrain the monster while protecting the eggs. The scales move rapidly until they register the results for both categories. With excellent defense and solid suppression power, the young man also passes. The tests continue at a fast pace, with another student using magical vines to immobilize the monster and protect the eggs. Shortly afterward, a swift swordswoman uses precise thrust to repel the beast's attacks. Another student concentrates radiant spells in her hands and also passes after demonstrating excellent mana control. Then the announcer calls Hector Gilbert, a white-haired young man wearing a red overcoat. The noble audience immediately stirs, commenting that Hector is considered the greatest swordsmanship prodigy of his generation. Lucius watches his rival with curiosity, since he never heard of the Gilbert family in his previous life. Drawing his sword in front of the lizard, Hector mocks the tricks used by mages and says he does not need them. He charges forward at tremendous speed and proudly declares that his family's swordsmanship is purely lethal. A reddish aura travels along the hilt of his sword as Hector prepares a single strike. With a cold gaze, he declares that his style simply cuts through any target in silence. In a fraction of a second, Hector passes the beast with a perfect slash that slices through the air of the arena. A red gash appears across the crystal lizard's body and splits the creature in half with a single strike. Hector calmly sheathes his sword, while one of the nearby flying eggs is also sliced apart by the wind from his attack. High above the arena, the scales of judgment quickly tilt to record the result. The crystal lizard body collapses onto the arena floor, perfectly divided into two pieces. With a perfect score in attack and an excellent score in defense, Hector temporarily takes first place. The spectators are stunned, commenting that he truly lives up to his reputation as the greatest prodigy of the new generation. Finally, the judge calls the last participant of the day, Lucius Elminster, who calmly enters through the tunnel. The nobles once again whisper with contempt, calling Lucius the cursed child of the mage family. After Hector's performance, much of the audience believes Lucius's demonstration will be nothing more than a joke. From the stands, Hector looks down at the boy with an arrogant expression. The beast is released again and begins gathering an enormous amount of purple energy inside its mouth. In the stands, Celestia and Fran watch anxiously, while the other candidates look on with contempt. The lizard unleashes a massive barrage of magical projectiles, covering nearly the entire field. In the royal box, one of the professors asks the director if this is not too demanding for new students. The director explains that the most common response would be to create a large barrier to protect all the eggs. Lucius, however, does not even consider that. In silence, he simply analyzes the trajectory of every attack. In the blink of an eye, he disappears from everyone's sight, leaving even the creature confused. The evaluators and academy masters widen their eyes, stunned by the boy's speed. In midair, Lucius moves between the projectiles and protects each egg with extremely precise touches. Performing acrobatics in the air, he neutralizes the attacks as if it were a dance. The entire audience is left speechless by how effortlessly the boy controls the situation. The director realizes Lucius is not using enchantments or barriers, only pure mana with absurd precision. To the masters, it would be like trying to catch every single drop of rain, and actually succeeding. Still focused, Lucius uses the momentum of his fall to direct his energy toward the monster. Pointing his fingers, he concentrates a small spark of energy to finish the test. The creature roars and tries to fire one final sphere of power from its mouth. But Lucius dives into free fall, channeling a beam of light at his fingertips. With a short command for it to stop, he strikes the creature's power core before the attack can be fired. The monster is subdued and collapses paralyzed, while every egg gently descends through the air without a single scratch. The entire stadium falls silent at the sight of that perfect result. Above them, the scales of judgment react with a thunderous sound that echoes throughout the arena. The nobles turn pale, try to understand how Lucius managed to accomplish that. Dozens of golden weights begin piling onto the attack side until it reaches the maximum value. At the same time, the defense side is filled with countless blue crystal weights. The score is so high that both sides overflow, sending weights scattering through the air. The crowd is stunned, saying a score like that should be impossible for a human. Lilia grits her teeth, unable to believe the level displayed by the Elminster heir. Standing at the center of the arena, Lucius simply watches the sacred artifact glow. Divine light erupts into the sky and confirms the highest score ever recorded in the Empire. The system awards Lucius the maximum Estelle rating in both attack and egg protection. The announcer proclaims that Lucius Elminster has claimed the absolute first place among the new students. The crowd goes wild, rising to their feet to applaud the historic result. Fran raises her fists and cries with joy, while Celestia covers her face, overwhelmed by her son's success. But not everyone is happy. In the box, Hector grips the railing so tightly that his fingers begin to tremble. The swordsman grits his teeth, consumed by envy as he stares at Lucius. Paying no attention to the hateful stares, Lucius remains on the field just as calm as before. The master of ceremonies speaks again to announce that the Medal of Honor will be awarded to the top freshman. Lucius calmly walks toward the altar, standing out among all the other candidates. The highest ranking authority of the academy looks solemnly at the young man before presenting the award. Greenish energy appears in the air as the sacred badge of honor is summoned. Lucius carefully watches the glow of the artifact that represents leadership of the new class. The moment the badge is pinned to his chest, an aura of mana surrounds his body, marking the beginning of this new stage. Lucius closes his eyes for a moment, satisfied that he has perfectly completed the first step of his plan. The director ends the ceremony and tells the freshmen that academy life will officially begin the following day. The view opens to the massive castle of the Royal Academy, where the students will spend the next several years. The instructors tell everyone to check the boards for their room assignments and head to the dormitories. Outside, Fran wipes away a tear before saying goodbye to the young master. Being as dramatic as ever, she delivers a message from the mansion's servants and promises that everyone will be waiting for his return. Lucius thanks her with a smile and asks Fran to take good care of his mother while he is away. Then Celestia holds her son's face in both hands and sadly asks if he really has to leave. Resting her forehead against his, she promises to pray every day for the boy's safety. She also asks Lucius never to forget how many people at the mansion are rooting for him. Touched by her affection, the boy smiles and promises he will not forget. After saying goodbye to both of them, Lucius heads onto campus and officially begins his new life at the academy. Walking alone, he thinks that taking first place in the exam was the perfect beginning to his climb to the top. But the dorm assignments are extremely unequal. The first place student receives an exclusive luxury castle, while the other freshmen stay in an old, dark building filled with small shared rooms. Lilia storms into the dorm furious, complaining that living like this is humiliating while her roommate tries to calm her down. A girl with glasses calmly moves a chess piece and warns the redhead not to end up setting the room on fire. She reminds her that the best part about the academy is that anyone can take first place from someone else at any time. The following day, the new students begin taking their seats for their first class. Lucius sits calmly while several nobles behind him whisper that his victory came from dirty tricks. When one student comments that Lucius might actually be talented, Hector frowns. Irritated, he scolds the student and insists the boy's victory was nothing more than a cheap magic trick. Still consumed by anger, Hector keeps glaring at Lucius from his seat. Through the tall hallway window, a figure in a black cloak silently watches the students. The mysterious man holds an ancient book and carries an intense magical presence around him. Inside the classroom, the students feel that aura approaching and immediately become alert. Hector says dismissively that if this were a real battle, his sword would settle everything in an instant. Before he can even finish, the hooded professor appears beside him and tells the young man to abandon that useless fighting spirit. Hector jumps in surprise and turns around, covered in cold sweat, unable to understand how the instructor moved so quickly. Even so, he arrogantly replies that he does not even know who the man is and has no obligation to obey him. He even mocks the demonstration, saying he will not be intimidated by a cheap magic trick. In the back of the classroom, several students begin laughing and comment that this imperial professor has no dignity at all. The hooded man merely sighs and remains completely calm despite their provocations. Then he raises one hand toward the students and warns them that he will only repeat himself one more time. Without wasting any time, the professor speaks a command word and activates his magic. Crushing gravitational pressure falls over the entire classroom and immediately silences every mocking voice. Hector is slammed against his desk by the weight, completely helpless against the overwhelming force. Around him, the other students break into a cold sweat, realizing that they are facing someone extremely powerful. Lucius, on the other hand, watches everything calmly and notices how effortlessly the instructor controls that force. The professor removes the pressure and tells everyone to remember that lesson well. Walking between the desks, he begins explaining how the students' lives will work from this point forward. He warns them that noble bloodlines and influential family names will have absolutely no value in this place. The students remain bent over their desks, still trying to recover from the pressure they just experienced. Reaching the front of the classroom, the instructor emphasizes that noble titles mean absolutely nothing inside the academy. Revealing his face in a stern gaze, he makes it clear that the rules of this institution will not be kind to anyone. Within the academy walls, according to him, individual strength is the only thing that truly matters. With an intimidating expression, he looks over the students to make sure no one challenges his authority again. Lucius simply meets his gaze, making the man give a slight smile when he sees that the class is finally understood. Without dragging things out any longer, the professor announces the beginning of the course orientation. He formally introduces himself as Valerius, the instructor responsible for their class. Valerius explains that he will be teaching the Royal Academy students fundamental theory. Watching him from a distance, Lucius studies his face and immediately recognizes the man. He is the same imperial evaluator who examined Lucius's soul when he was still a baby. Since he serves directly under the Empire, Lucius admits that Valerius's spiritual energy and presence are genuinely impressive. The professor continues and announces that he will begin by explaining the institution's strict ranking system. As magical light appears around him, he reveals that every student's main goal is to graduate at the top of the class. Several holographic panels appear in the air, displaying the ranking that will determine each student's position. Valerius explains that the rankings will update in real time according to their performance in classes and missions. Hector finds his name in 51st place and clearly does not like his position. When Lilia discovers that she is ranked 72nd, directly behind an unknown student named Noah, she explodes with indignation. Valerius continues and explains that graduating at the top requires entering the top 16 and competing in the quadrennial competition. That event is the Academy Duel Tournament, where only the strongest competitor can claim the highest title. The winner becomes the Academy's top student and also receives a special imperial blessing. The moment Lucius hears about the reward, he discreetly clenches his fist. That is exactly what he is looking for. But a student in the back stands up angrily and complains that fighting for the top for 4 years will not give anyone a chance to rest. A sound echoes through the classroom, and the panel immediately begins changing that student's ranking. In front of everyone, the boy watches his position plummet from somewhere in the 400s. Valerius warns that complaints and tantrums also affect the rankings and recommends that everyone think carefully before speaking. And there is something even worse. Once a year, the 125 lowest ranked students will be expelled without exception. Anyone who finishes at the bottom of the ranking leaves the academy without the right to a second chance. Hector realizes this brutal system is how the institution separates those capable of keeping up from those who fall behind. Valerius looks at the class and asks if everyone now understands how harsh this place really is. Shortly afterward, he forms a glowing vortex in his hand and announces that it is time for their first practical lesson. The professor opens a massive dimensional rift in front of the students, revealing a new testing area. Lilia is stunned to see him use such complex teleportation magic as if it were nothing. Hector grits his teeth as he watches how easily the spell is cast and thinks that this professor really is a monster. In the blink of an eye, the entire class is transported to a dark clearing in front of an ancient stone bridge. Lucius calmly observes the new environment while the other students are still trying to understand where they ended up. Ahead of them is a long bridge illuminated by a greenish glow and suspended above endless darkness. Valerius turns toward the class and explains that this structure will be the first major lesson of his course. As calmly as possible, the professor says that the task is actually very simple. Stepping onto the bridge, he explains the rule: everyone will have 1 month to make it all the way across. Some students begin whispering, thinking it is ridiculous to be given 30 days to cross a simple bridge. Full of confidence, 2 boys run forward and say an obstacle like that is nothing. Hector senses the danger and tries to tell them to stop, but the 2 ignore his warning. Without hesitation, they sprint onto the bridge, wanting to finish the challenge before everyone else. But the moment the first student firmly steps on the stones, a magical reaction activates. An explosion of greenish energy erupts from the ground and surrounds the young man, beginning to drain his strength. Within seconds, he loses consciousness and collapses in front of the class. Hector coldly warns the other student that he should stop if he does not want to end up the same way. The affected student falls onto his back, leaving the other students terrified by what they just witnessed. Lilia clenches her fists, trying to figure out what kind of threat is draining the energy of anyone who steps onto the bridge. Lucius observes the distance Valerius crossed without effort and begins to understand the trap. He realizes that the bridge's true mechanism is rapidly draining the spiritual energy of anyone who steps onto it. From the other side, Valerius reminds them that power is the foundation of everything and challenges the class to accumulate enough energy to cross within a month. One student, clearly nervous, raises his hand to ask a question. He wants to know what the usual passing rate is for students in that course. Still facing away from them, Valerius replies that in an average year the number is around 20%. But the professor stops, turns his head with a strange smile, and says that he misspoke. Coldly, he clarifies that he was not talking about the passing rate. 20% is actually the survival rate of the students who take that test. Panic spreads through the class, and everyone begins saying that they need to increase their spiritual energy reserves. The students become desperate as they imagine how much power they would need to accumulate in only 1 month. Lucius, however, analyzes the trap and realizes the solution has nothing to do with that. Taking into account how quickly the bridge drains mana, he begins doing the calculations. Considering the full length of the path, Lucius concludes that not even someone with a monstrous reserve could reach the other side. With a faint smile, he realizes that the advice to simply increase their spiritual energy is nothing more than a bluff. Lucius's golden eyes shine as he finally discovers the true method for passing the test. While the others remain paralyzed by fear, he already knows exactly how he plans to cross that bridge. The class remains shocked by the 20% survival rate, believing that it has to be some kind of joke. Their fear grows when everyone remembers the student who just collapsed right in front of them. Some begin panicking, complaining that they did not enter the Royal Academy just to die during a class. Others are already thinking about quitting and even asking their families to cancel their enrollment before it is too late. Valerius hears the murmurs and comments that giving up truly is a wise decision for anyone with such a weak spirit. According to him, cowards like them would end up dead on the battlefield anyway. The professor turns toward the bridge and declares that everyone will have exactly 1 month to train before attempting the crossing. A massive golden timer appears in the sky and begins counting down nearly 30 days. After telling everyone to start training, Valerius disappears and leaves the students on their own. Lucius confidently watches him leave because he already knows what he needs to do. 20 days pass, and the students train without rest, using exhausting runs to increase their endurance. The pace is brutal, and everyone pushes their bodies to the limit while trying to expand their spiritual energy reserves. Lilia pushes herself as hard as possible during the daily exercises, determined not to fall behind. The students around her become worried by the intensity of her training and warn that she might end up hurting herself. Panting heavily, Lilia believes that if she cannot continuously release energy, she will never make it across that bridge. Meanwhile, other groups perform overload training while carrying enormous weights on their backs. One student suddenly turns around and is left speechless by what he sees beside him. Lilia is holding a colossal boulder above her head using nothing but physical strength. Gritting her teeth, the girl endures the enormous weight of the rock without giving up. In another part of the field, a hand covered by a black glove touches the ground to analyze the area. It is Hector, who decided to distance himself from everyone else and do his own training near the hills. With a focused gaze, he thinks about the true mechanism behind the bridge's trap. To test his theory, Hector throws a small stone and observes how the terrain reacts. He realizes that the magic only activates after contact if the stones lasts beyond a certain amount of time. Dark energy emerges from the ground and surrounds the object, draining away any trace of spiritual energy. Now that he understands the bridge's trigger, Hector comes up with what he believes is the perfect strategy. He draws his sword and releases a massive crimson aura around his body. Then he shoots forward at high speed using his sword technique, kicking up wind and dust in his path. His plan is straightforward: cross the entire bridge before the curse has time to activate. Confident in his speed, Hector believes this method will be enough to beat the test. With only 3 days remaining before the deadline, Lucius continues meditating alone. He has already confirmed his answer and knows the solution does not depend on the raw amount of energy. Bringing his hands together and producing a refined glow, he concludes that the secret lies in manipulation and control. In his previous life, Zeno had to learn how to fight using only a tiny reserve of spiritual energy. Because of that, he repeatedly trained his control until it became as precise as threading a needle. After years of that training, he developed extremely refined mastery over his own energy. That precise control was exactly what allowed Zeno to create his original technique, Phantom Shadow. But reaching that level came at a heavy price, pushing his body to the limit and making him cough up blood countless times. He came close to death countless times in real battles before finally perfecting that level of control. Since he carried that control over from his previous life, applying the same principle to the Academy's magic is much easier for Lucius. 2 students watch Lucius from a distance and mock him, saying that he spent the entire month sitting around and probably cheated during the entrance exam. A hooded figure also watches the scene and thinks that the spoiled Elminster brat, the famous cursed child, will finally fail. His gaze remains fixed on Lucius, who continues meditating atop the rocks as the cloudy sky signals the approaching deadline. With only 2 days remaining, the other students continue training until complete exhaustion. With a little over 1 day left, Hector practices high-speed slashes to perfect his flaming technique. He smiles in satisfaction, feeling that his body and technique have finally reached the necessary level. The students begin gathering in the clearing and notice that Lucius is still sitting in exactly the same place. Lilia looks at him irritably, unable to understand why the top freshman does not even seem to have trained. She wonders if Lucius simply gave up and accepted defeat from the very beginning. When the timer reaches its final 3 seconds, Lucius finally opens his golden eyes. At the very last moment, he gives a confident smile, ready for the test. The timer reaches 0, and Valerius reappears floating in the air, surrounded by his dark energy. Landing on the bridge, he announces that the 1-month deadline has finally ended. From the other side of the abyss, the professor looks at the entire class gathered on the opposite side. With a challenging smile, Valerius says he wants to see the results of their training and asks who will go first. The class remains silent until Hector and Lilia step forward at almost exactly the same time. Some of the weaker students begin trembling and ask who would actually have the courage to take the first step. The fear is so intense that several of them begin pushing the responsibility onto one another, forgetting all the confidence they had before. At that moment, 2 sets of firm footsteps echo toward the entrance of the bridge. Hector and Lilia say at the same time that they will go first, competing over who will begin the test. The two start arguing, with Hector saying he spoke first and Lilia asking if he has gone deaf. Hector tries to keep his composure, but Lilia insists the only fair way to decide is with rock, paper, scissors. Lucy simply watches their childish argument with a slight smile. Lilia celebrates loudly after winning, while Hector is stunned that he lost at a simple hand game. But while the two are arguing, several other students decide to take advantage of the opportunity and go ahead of them. 3 students suddenly start running without warning, catching Hector and Lilia completely off guard. Lilia freaks out when she realizes she wasted time on the game while the others simply cut in line. The excitement of the 3 does not last long. The moment they step onto the bridge, the ground begins releasing powerful purple energy. Dark claws and tentacles emerge from the stones and wrap around the students' bodies. Hector watches the scene coldly and thinks those 3 are complete idiots. Unable to resist the drain, the students lose consciousness and fall from the bridge toward the abyss. Others who still try to advance suffer the same fate, unable to understand why all the energy they accumulated is not helping. One after another, the students collapse from exhaustion and finally realize that brute force will not solve the problem. Valerius silently watches everything, knowing that the secret of the test was never having a gigantic energy reserve. The true method requires refining and regenerating mana internally faster than the bridge can drain it. That is the true purpose of the test, forcing the students to develop the fundamental principle of magical energy refinement. From the other side, Valerius taunts the class and asks whether no one there can even manage to advance a little farther. One terrified student replies that falling from that height means certain death. Tired of everyone else's cowardice, Lilia pushes the complainers aside and decides to face the challenge. With her cape fluttering in the wind and a determined gaze, the young woman positions herself in front of the bridge, ready to show what she can do. Lilia closes her eyes for a moment and takes a deep breath, gathering all her determination before moving forward. When she opens them again, her eyes are burning with resolve, making it clear that she has no intention of backing down. At that moment, she releases an explosion of fire around her body and steps firmly onto the cursed bridge. A massive pillar of flames rises from the stones as Lilia forces her way forward through sheer brute force. Watching from a distance, Valerius acknowledges the girl's impressive amount of mana but remains skeptical. After only a few yards, Lilia's speed drops sharply as the stones begin draining her power. Dark tentacles wrap around her legs, making her stumble under the constant drain. Valerius thinks that against a curse designed to absorb all of its target's energy, brute force alone is not enough. Nearly dropping to her knees, Lilia refuses to give up and burns even more mana to stay on her feet. Valerius's eyes widen slightly, surprised by the student's determination and stubbornness. Panting and barely able to breathe, she shouts for them not to underestimate her and continues resisting the exhaustion. With a battle cry, Lilia releases what remains of her reserves and swears that she will not lose to a simple bridge. Her flame-covered boot finally reaches the opposite side, carrying her through the final stretch. Valerius is impressed that she released so much energy at once that the bridge could barely keep up with the drain. After crossing the finish line, Lilia staggers past the professor and completely loses her strength. She falls face first onto the ground, exhausted and with almost no mana remaining. Rolling on her back to catch her breath, the redhead sighs in relief while Valerius watches her seriously. Even while lying there and barely able to move, she gives an arrogant smile and asks what he thought. Valerius coldly confirms that she passed, making Lilia celebrate right there on the ground. On the other side of the abyss, Hector watches the scene and scoffs when he sees the condition she ended up in. He criticizes Lilia's method, saying that using all her mana like that would be fatal in a real battle. Hector calmly analyzes the trap, confident in the conclusion he reached during training. He remembers his test with the stone and how the mechanism does not begin absorbing energy instantly. There is a short delay between contact with the ground and the curse activating. Knowing this, Hector confidently grips his sword. To him, all he has to do is keep the floor from having enough time to react, so he surrounds his body with an intense, reddish aura. Hector shoots toward the bridge like a projectile, leaving a shockwave and cloud of dust behind him. Running across the stones at an absurd speed, he mocks the idea that a simple curse could stop his sword. With a single leap, he cuts through the air with his blade and lands perfectly on the other side in front of the instructor. Without breaking a sweat and using almost no mana, Hector lands elegantly with a triumphant smile. Valerius recognizes the intelligence behind crossing too quickly to be drained and admits that Hector acted like a true prodigy. The professor still complains that trying to attack him was unacceptable, but Hector ignores that and demands his result. Valerius confirms that he passed, and the noble replies that it was the least he expected. On the other side, the students are stunned, commenting that they could barely keep up with his speed. Lilia glares at Hector, annoyed that he crossed so easily while she nearly exhausted herself completely. Suddenly, the entire class turns toward Lucius, the student who placed first in the entrance exam. The students begin whispering, doubting him when they notice how calm he looks. They comment that Lucius does not seem to have as much mana as Lilia or Hector's physical enhancement and speed. From the other side, Valerius watches with anticipation, curious to see what the Elminster heir will do. With tiny blue sparks crackling beneath his feet, Lucius takes his first step, ready to show them his answer. Lucius simply walks across the bridge completely calmly, leaving his classmates speechless. The hooded young man watches in surprise and admits that Lucius taking first place in the exam really was not luck. Ignoring the desperation of those who collapsed along the way, he maintains a calm and steady pace. Lilia complains that it is boring, but Valerius smiles as he recognizes the perfect answer from someone who understood the puzzle. With steady steps, Lucius reaches the other side without any difficulty. He walks straight past the instructor and thinks that perhaps he overestimated the challenge. Suddenly, one of the students who had collapsed gets up celebrating, saying that the training finally worked. Valerius's eyes widen when the others start shouting that the bridge can now be crossed normally. Several students rush forward and cross without feeling any drain, believing they have finally beaten the test. Lilia is impressed, while Hector simply calls them idiots for getting carried away. Valerius, however, knows something is wrong and quickly realizes what actually happened. His gaze immediately turns toward Lucius as he realizes that the change was his doing. While precisely refining his own mana, Lucius did something almost unthinkable during his walk. He injected tiny, calculated amounts of energy into the magical circuits, overloading them without activating the curse. An ancient structure maintained for 1,000 years was dismantled in seconds through the boy's precise manipulation. Thunderous cracks begin echoing through the abyss, making all the students stop in alarm. Hector and Lilia are speechless when they realize Lucius simply destroyed the curse formula. An explosion of lightning and debris fills the area as the 1,000-year-old bridge shatters and falls into the abyss. Amid the dust and sparks, Lucius simply keeps a calm smile, like someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Valerius stares at the destruction in disbelief and calls the boy a monster for going that far during a simple test. Even so, the professor eventually smiles, clearly satisfied by the talent he just witnessed. Looking at the smoke and abyss, some confused students even think the bridge collapsed simply because it was old. Others break into a cold sweat when they realize they could have died if they had taken even one slower step. Despite the shock, those who reach the other side celebrate in relief. But a dark-eyed young man turns back and remembers the classmates who fell earlier. He feels sorry for those who plunged into the abyss at the beginning, knowing they also trained for the entire month. Silence settles over the ravine as small pieces of stone continue disappearing into the darkness below. Noticing the heavy atmosphere, Valerius raises his hand, snaps his fingers, and tells everyone to calm down. Purple mist rises from the bottom of the cliff, safely bringing the unconscious students back up. The class widens their eyes, unable to understand how everyone is still alive and unharmed. Valerius walks among the floating bodies and prepares to give the final verdict on their first lesson. With a smile, he reveals to everyone's surprise that every student there passed. Confused, one student asks how someone who fell and failed to cross could possibly have passed. Valerius explains that their cultivation ability was measured, but the true purpose was to test each student's determination. The students helped their fallen classmates back to their feet while listening to his explanation. The professor praises the class's courage, reminding that even when faced with the possibility of death, no one turned around and ran away. According to Valerius, that strength of spirit can become a weapon far more valuable than any natural talent. His words make the young students understand the true value of perseverance in that test. Even Hector falls silent for a moment as he reflects on the lesson. Looking toward the clearing sky, Valerius says that the step they took that day carries enormous value. Excitement spreads through the students after overcoming something that had seemed impossible. Valerius smiles and formally congratulates the entire class. As the sun begins to appear between the clouds again, the professor sincerely says that he is proud of them. Lilia lifts her chin and laughs proudly, saying the result could not have been any different. While the students begin dispersing in celebration, Lucius remains quiet and thoughtful. He knows the Academy's relentless routine is only beginning, but the relaxed atmosphere ends when Valerius takes another step and begins speaking again. He warns them that passing the test is one thing, but their individual ranking evaluation is something completely different. The professor starts from the top and announces that Lucius Elminster now holds 45th place. Lucius does not even blink when he hears his own name and maintains the same calm expression. One classmate complains, unable to understand how someone who simply walked slowly earned the highest score. The students beside him bet that the next position will certainly belong to Hector. Others believe it will be Lilia, who is already posing like a winner while waiting for her name. Valerius breaks everyone's expectations and points toward the mysterious hooded boy. He announces no Raven in 46th place, leaving Hector and Lilia stunned. Hector grits his teeth, irritated that someone he barely knows surpassed him. The moment Noah hears his name, he panics from all the attention and runs straight into the forest. Lilia freaks out over ranking behind someone so quiet and asks if that boy was even part of their class. Hiding behind a tree trunk, Noah grips his hood and desperately whispers that he was there the entire time. Lucius watches the scene curiously, amused by his classmates' strange behavior. Valerius finishes announcing the rankings and tells everyone to accept their positions without complaining. In 57th place, Lilia huffs in frustration over being so far from the top. In 47th, Hector tells a classmate to shut up when she asks about the fatigue in his legs. At the top of the freshman class remain Lucius Elminster and No Raven, leading the new rankings. Conversations spread among the students, divided between those who climbed and those who lost positions. Valerius gets the class's attention again to explain how their routine will work beginning the next day. He announces that every student will be required to join a team of 4. Those groups will serve as the basic unit for everything, from theoretical classes to field missions. Valerius explains that the stronger the team, the more dangerous the missions they will receive. There is only one important detail: even while working together, teammates remain direct rivals in the rankings. The students swallow nervously when they realize they will have to compete even against their own allies. Valerius says that the official team assignments in each group's first mission will be revealed the next day. But there is one exception: the top 4 students from the test will form an elite team together. Lilia is furious when she realizes she will have to work with Lucius, Hector, and the strange hooded boy. Already angry, she starts demanding that no one dare interfere with her performance during missions. Amused by the chaos of the 4-person team, Valerius ends the announcement and tells everyone to rest. Lucius simply studies his new teammates, finding the combination quite interesting. He figures that since they are the strongest group in the class, the Academy will certainly throw the most dangerous missions at them. That will be troublesome, but Lucius knows facing greater dangers is also a fast way to grow stronger. Before everyone leaves, Valerius drops one final piece of news: the elite team's first mission is already scheduled for the following morning. The professor gives a slight smile and begins explaining how the group's exercise will work. The 4 highest-ranked students look at each other, bringing completely different personalities into the same group. The challenge is simple to understand: to win, they only need to land a single hit on Valerius himself. The next day, Lilia and Hector arrive full of confidence, convinced that hitting the professor will not be that difficult. Valerius waits for the group in an open field, ready to show them the difference in strength firsthand. Blue flames appear around the instructor as he warns them not to jump to conclusions. A wave of blue aura crosses the clearing and makes all 4 students feel Valerius's enormous pressure. Surrounded by a vortex of power, he makes it clear that none of them could face him alone. Valerius extends his hand and challenges the 4 to attack together with everything they have. Tension fills the field as the students take their combat positions. Lucius remains calm, facing that display of power without any intimidation. The confrontation begins, and the entire field vibrates beneath the energy released by the veteran. Lilia and Hector charge first, still competing over which of them will manage to hit the professor before the other. As he runs, Lucius analyzes Valerius and remembers that he is a renowned military evaluator of the Empire. The boy knows he is facing one of the Empire's most dangerous forces, with few people at the Academy capable of defeating him in a duel. And precisely because he understands that danger, Lucius sees this as the perfect opportunity to test his own level. The 4 attack from different directions, trying to strike at the same time. With an excited glow in his eyes, Lucius smiles at the chance to measure his strength against someone at that level. Lilia leaps forward surrounded by flames. Hector attacks from the right, and Lucius moves through the center. Hector attacks first, launching a thrust at tremendous speed. Valerius dodges with an almost imperceptible movement, and the blade cuts through nothing but air. Hector is shocked by the professor's reaction speed, while Valerius responds with nothing but a smile. Giving him no room, Lilia drops from above like a flaming meteor, aiming a powerful kick. Surrounded by fiery energy, she concentrates all her strength into breaking through the instructor's defense. With her eyes burning, Lilia follows up with an explosive punch to prevent any chance of dodging. An explosion tears through the ground and sends dirt and stones flying throughout the area. But Valerius blocks the strike with one hand without even stepping back. Taking advantage of the opening, Noah activates his shadow magic from a distance and casts a binding circle at the professor. A purple seal expands beneath Valerius's feet, attempting to pin him to the ground. Noah keeps his hands extended and focuses all his attention on restricting the target's movements. The spell works for an instant and creates a slight opening in the instructor's stance. Hector takes advantage of it and fires dozens of cutting energy projectiles at Valerius. Not caring how close his allies are, he shouts for everyone to stay out of his sword's way. Lilia is forced to retreat quickly to avoid being hit and immediately starts yelling at Hector. Without any hesitation, she uses his head as a foothold to gain momentum and jump again. As she rises, Lilia curses at the swordsman for nearly hitting her with his own attacks. In the rear, No begins to panic when he realizes the two are arguing in the middle of the test. The young man swallows nervously, understanding that their lack of teamwork could cost them dearly. But Valerius' attention is drawn to a presence that silently appears behind him. Using the confusion as cover, Lucius descends from above while concentrating a powerful magical beam. A massive amount of mana gathers in his hands and forms a sphere of blue lightning. Below him, the other students continue advancing with their guards raised beneath the professor's pressure. The electrical attack falls from the sky in a straight line toward Valerius, but the instructor remains unfazed and easily disperses the blast, scattering lightning around his body. The impact creates a powerful shockwave and forces Lilia and Hector to shield themselves from the wind. As the dust begins settling, the students quickly try to locate the professor again. Lucius lands gently on the grass without showing any concern or exhaustion. Looking at the destruction around him, he does not hide his dissatisfaction with the lack of care during the battle. Mockingly, he politely asks Valerius to be a little more careful with the Academy's property. Standing in the center of a newly formed crater, the man in the black cloak remains firm before him. Valerius responds with a provocative smile, while Lucius returns an attentive and calculating gaze. With no patience for conversation, Lilia charges again surrounded by flames, while Hector promises to hit him on the next attempt. Lucius watches the two and continues calmly analyzing the professor's combat pattern. The pair attacks together with sword strikes and flaming punches supported by magical projectiles. Valerius suddenly releases an impact barrier and sends both of them flying backward almost effortlessly. Watching everything carefully, Lucius notices an important detail about how that defense works. Lilia is thrown near Noah, while Hector plants his feet firmly on the ground to keep his balance. Valerius calmly closes his eyes, but Lucius is already beginning to understand the secret behind that apparent invulnerability. At first glance, it seems like the professor is fighting everyone at the same time, but that is not exactly what is happening. In reality, he responds to each attack in sequence only so quickly that everything appears simultaneous. The more often he has to change positions to block, the larger a small opening becomes at different points behind him. From this observation, Lucius understands that the seemingly perfect defense is a flaw. He decides to synchronize his own attack with the rhythm of the blocks to exploit that exact opening. On the ground, Lilia punches the earth and refuses to accept defeat. Rising furiously, she demands that Valerius not underestimate her, while the others prepare themselves as well. The professor is merely amused by their persistence and smiles when he sees that they still want to continue. Lilia and Hector charge once again, combining fire and swordsmanship in a direct offensive. Their assault is supported by spells fired from a distance, attempting to overwhelm Valerius' reflexes. While No casts another magic circle, Lucius uses the distraction and races across the battlefield. At the center of the fight, Valerius continues repelling every attack with precision, dodging by the smallest margins. Swords and fists pass only inches from his face and neck without disturbing his composure. From the top of a nearby tree, Lucius watches everything and waits for the exact opening to appear. Lilia and Hector launch a synchronized attack at full strength, forcing Valerius to change stances even faster. From above, Lucius knows attacking head-on like that will not be enough. The three-person offensive reaches its maximum speed and creates exactly the distraction he has been waiting for. Without wasting a moment, Lucius concentrates an extremely bright beam at his fingertips. He launches himself from above toward Valerius' back, aiming precisely at the blind spot that just appeared. The flash is so intense that the other students have to cover their eyes. Lucius smiles when he realizes he has finally broken through the professor's defense. An explosion of lightning strikes Valerius' back at point-blank range and illuminates the entire field. The impact covers the instructor's silhouette in a storm of light. As the energy fades into the air, Lucius carefully watches the result. But when the smoke clears, Valerius is still standing inside a magical barrier without a single injury. Lilia and Hector are shocked when they realize the attack did not even hurt him. Noah also looks frustrated, amazed that magic of that level failed to leave any mark. With a confident smile, Valerius brings his fingers together and praises the group for finally forcing him to use defensive magic. A gentle breeze appears around him as he turns to face the four students. In a provocative tone, the professor comments that perhaps he overestimated their abilities too much. He then warns that if they do not pass within the next hour, the team will be disbanded and all of them will be sent to lower classes. The threat of demotion strikes directly at Lilia and Hector's pride, making them even angrier. Valerius reminds them that the objective is to fight as a team of four and warns that from this point forward, he will no longer hold back. He also recommends that they come up with an actual plan, instead of simply waiting for an opening to appear. Lucius keeps his golden eyes fixed on the professor, calculating every detail of the situation. Losing her temper, Lilia starts complaining and asks whether that man is even human. Trying to control her anger, she frowns and decides that she will not accept defeat. Without hesitation, she marches over to Lucius and gets his attention. Staring at the boy, Lilia demands to know what plan he is obviously already forming in his head. Lucius simply returns her gaze in silence, maintaining the same calm demeanor. Somewhat reluctantly, she admits that he was the only one capable of forcing Valerius to use magic, so she is willing to listen to him. Clenching her fists, Lilia makes it clear that she refuses to fail this test. She says she will not accept being demoted or losing here under any circumstances. Seeing her determination, Lucius finally decides to explain what he noticed. The four gather around him to hear his instructions. Lucius reveals that the instant his spell struck the defense, he noticed a slight distortion in the barrier's spiritual energy. Hector crosses his arms, surprised that Lucius managed to notice something so subtle in the middle of the attack. Lucius continues and explains how he believes the technique works. The barrier concentrates energy exactly where it is struck to increase its rigidity, so repeatedly attacking one spot only strengthens the defense. Because of that, if they attack several points at the same time, the energy will have to spread out, and the overall resistance will decrease. Noah is impressed by how quickly Lucius managed to understand the ability. Lilia understands the idea and immediately surrounds her fists with flames, excited by the possibility. With a sharp smile, she concludes that the more coordinated attacks they launch at once, the easier it will be to break the shield. Lucius confirms it and asks if she can keep up with the rhythm. Hector also agrees to participate but warns with a slight smile that he is only cooperating for his own benefit, not to help Lucius. Noah immediately assures them that he can provide the volume of attacks required for the plan. The four take their positions and form a much more organized battle line. Noticing the change, Valerius smiles, curious to see what they prepared. Filled with adrenaline, Lilia gives the signal and the group charges together. The four attack from several angles with blades, fire, and magic, forcing Valerius to raise a defensive dome around his entire body. Farther back, Noah creates a large magic circle and maintains a constant barrage to spread out the professor's defense. Valerius notices the attempt to overload his barrier but questions whether that level of power will really be enough. Hector concentrates all his energy into his sword, his eyes glowing red as he aims at the chosen point. Descending at high speed, he drives the blade directly into the center of the barrier. The tip of the sword strikes the shield with a thunderous impact and creates shockwaves through the air. Gripping the hilt with both hands, Hector grits his teeth against the resistance and shouts to his teammates. Lilia dives from above, surrounded by a vortex of flames, to join the attack. She strikes the hilt of the sword with a flaming blow and throws her entire body weight behind the blade. The two combine physical strength and fire to push the sword forward and try to pierce the dome. The pressure finally causes the first cracks to appear across the surface of the blue barrier. Even so, Valerius remains calm and admits that this is their best attack so far. But he still says it is a shame and begins gathering a huge amount of energy in his hands to counterattack. Hector and Lilia are already nearly exhausted, feeling their arms begin to give out. With Noah also exhausted on the ground, the two lose strength and the sword threatens to slip away from the barrier. Suddenly, another hand grabs the hilt with them and prevents the pressure from being lost. With a determined smile and glowing golden eyes, Lucius warns them that the fight is not over yet. He channels his own mana through the blade and releases a circular explosion of energy around the three of them. Filled with a new surge of strength, Lilia and Hector shout and push the sword to its limit. With their hands gathered around the same weapon, fire and blue mana emerge into a single offensive. As Hector and Lilia look at the glowing blade, a golden beam cuts through the sky. Valerius looks up in surprise and sees a pillar of golden light descending directly onto the barrier. The final impact destroys the shield into thousands of fragments and releases a shockwave across the entire field. With the defense shattered, the students are thrown backward and slide across the grass. While Hector and Lilia struggle to stop themselves, Lucius lands with far more control. When they look at Valerius, they see a small cut bleeding on his cheek, and the professor announces with a smile that they passed. Hector and Lilia break into huge smiles of pure excitement when they hear the confirmation. Noah tries to celebrate too, but exhaustion wins and he falls face first onto the ground. Soon afterward, Lilia and Hector also drop to their knees completely exhausted, while Lucius remains standing. Catching his breath, Hector tells Lilia that she should thank him and that he might even accept her as his subordinate. She immediately gets angry, but Hector simply replies that he does not usually repeat himself. Ignoring the argument behind him, Lucius begins walking while thinking about what just happened. Looking at his own hand, he tries to understand that new sensation. He wonders exactly what happened when his magic came into contact with the sword. Lucius realizes that his mana fused with the weapon so deeply that for an instant, it felt like part of the blade itself. The possibility of combining magic and swordsmanship sparks a new idea inside him. With an ambitious smile, Lucius imagines the potential he would have if he completely mastered that fusion. The discovery excites him because he may have just found the beginning of a new power. Valerius approaches the group and formally confirms that all of them passed the exercise. He explains that the true purpose of the test was to teach them the value of teamwork, and they finally managed to understand it. The professor advises the four not to forget the cooperation they demonstrated during that final attack. Valerius then dissolves into dark smoke and leaves the students alone on the field. Still thinking about the battle, Lucius keeps staring staring at his own hand, fascinated by the sensation of combining magic and swordsmanship. With a dark smile, he concludes that mastering this fusion could become the weapon he needs to surpass that man. Shortly afterward, the scene shifts to the massive Royal Academy library, where several students study in silence. Perched on a ladder between the shelves, Lucius flips through an ancient book searching for answers. The book discusses the fundamentals of spiritual energy and the way it circulates through the human body. According to the text, transmuted energy passes through internal channels before being manifested through the body. It can be converted into magical power by mages or battle energy by swordsmen. As a general rule, people are believed to be born capable of developing only one of these two circuits. Lucius thinks about the previous attack, which only worked by combining his magic with Hector's battle energy, and wonders if he could do the same alone. Curious, he turns the page and searches for older records on the subject. The text reveals that in extremely rare cases, some people possessed both circuits, and that the Academy's founder used both to combine swordsmanship and magic. As he reads this, Lucius' eyes shine when he realizes his idea actually has a foundation. He then remembers a test he performed alone on the training field after the fight against Valerius. Outside, Lucius tried channeling his own mana directly through a sword to reproduce the phenomenon. The first attempt failed, but it still left behind an important clue. During the process, he felt a faint trace of the battle energy circuit he mastered in his previous life. That means the ability he pushed to its limit in his previous incarnation may still be dormant inside his current body. If he can awaken that circuit and combine it with magic, he could achieve the same legendary power attributed to the founder. Later, a woman descends from the sky into a massive clearing surrounded by hundreds of students. Using a megaphone, instructor Kathy introduces herself and announces a special exercise for teams ranked between 30th and 100th place. She excitedly reveals that it will be a tournament involving upperclassmen, immediately putting all the freshmen on alert. The students from the higher classes quickly notice the freshmen and begin looking at them mockingly. Kathy encourages everyone to do their best to climb the rankings, while several hostile gazes turn toward Elminster's team. Looking at the competitors around them, Lucius notices that practically everyone there has a higher ranking than his group. Feeling superior, the more experienced students begin laughing and whispering toward the four of them. Annoyed by the taunts, Leon loses her patience and tells everyone to stop staring at them. The redhead steps forward, ready to fight, showing no fear despite the difference in age or level. While Hector tries to maintain his composure beside her, Leon only grows more irritated. Suddenly, a gigantic student walks by absent-mindedly and bumps hard into her back. Lion turns around furiously to complain, but the huge man awkwardly apologizes, saying he could barely see her because of his own height. Looking up at the absolute giant in front of her, she is left speechless by the upperclassman's size. Through the megaphone, Kathy explains that the objective of the test is to find the spiritual orb hidden inside a gigantic tree at the center of the mangrove. The team that takes the item first and manages to keep it until the end will be declared the winner. Hearing about the relic, Lucius immediately becomes interested in what it can do. Kathy explains that the orb is made of pure spiritual energy and can permanently increase the reserves of whoever absorbs it. The news sends the students into a frenzy, because using that artifact would be equivalent to saving years of training. An ambitious glow appears in Lucius's eyes as he sees exactly the opportunity he has been looking for. With a smile, he realizes he has found the perfect catalyst for his plans. Lucius calculates that absorbing such an enormous amount of energy may be exactly the trigger needed to awaken his battle circuit. While the other teams prepare weapons and magic, the atmosphere in the arena becomes increasingly tense. Ready for the competition, Lucius and his teammates take their positions, determined to claim the orb. A flare is fired into the sky, and Kathy begins the test as everyone races toward the mangrove. Led by Lucius, the freshmen move in formation along the narrow forest trail. Suddenly, he senses danger approaching and looks to the side, noticing rapid movement between the trees. Two armed upperclassmen emerge from the shadows with malicious smiles, ready to ambush the group. Leaping from the branches with a spear and sword, the two mock the freshmen, certain that this will be an easy victory. Hector frowns, assuming those opponents must hold much higher positions in the rankings. The upperclassmen dive toward them with their weapons aimed forward and shout for the freshmen to die right there. Lucius does not even flinch. He raises his hands and fires two blasts of blue lightning, hitting the attackers while they are still in midair. The two fall unconscious in front of another group of upperclassmen who cannot understand how they were defeated so quickly. Calmly turning around, Lucius reminds his teammates not to be fooled by rankings because their previous training already showed what they are capable of. Firmly, he tells them that all four of them really are strong. His words strike directly at Leanne and Hector's pride, renewing their confidence. But another team of upperclassmen appears on top of a hill, mocking that statement. Their leader gives a smug smile and warns that the real confrontation begins now. Hector draws his sword and coldly faces the group, ready to fight. Several students block the path with activated spells and declare that they will hunt the freshmen to steal their points. A spiky-haired young man concentrates a sphere of emerald energy in his hands while laughing uncontrollably. A storm of green lightning forms above the clearing and crashes down toward the first-year students. Feeling the pressure of the attack, Hector tightens his grip on his sword and prepares to act. With a quick and precise horizontal slash, he cuts the enemy spell in half. The The rival mage is stunned to see his attack neutralized so easily by a freshman. Hector keeps his eyes on the enemies and takes a firm stance to protect the rear. Taking advantage of the distraction, two other warriors leap from the trees with raised swords and aim directly at Lian. The upperclassmen descend with their full body weight, trying to crush her in one strike. Lian simply grits her teeth with no intention of backing down. Surrounding her body with a powerful aura of fire, she charges forward to show them what she can do. The redhead leaps toward the two in midair and prepares a punch loaded with fiery energy. The collision with their blades creates an explosion of fire and sparks, stopping the upperclassmen's attack. Feeling the pressure of the impact, Lian frowns and prepares her next strike. The two enemies panic when they realize the girl's absurd strength. Concentrating even more flames into her fist, she prepares a point-blank attack. Shouting for them not to underestimate her, Lian fires a blast of fire that sends both opponents flying. But immediately afterward, she notices a massive barrage of ice spears coming from behind. An upperclassman mage appears above a blue magic circle and fires dozens of frozen spikes at the group. While Hector and Lian are occupied at the front, the enemy tries to hit them from behind. Remembering Lucius's words about the team's strength, the hooded mage decides that he will not be a burden to the others. Channeling his dark magic, he creates dozens of shadow blades to intercept the ice in midair. The spell destroys every spike into thousands of particles, completely neutralizing the attack. Shortly afterward, the final enemy warrior is slammed violently into the ground, ending the ambush with the upperclassmen's defeat. Surprised by their own coordination, the three exchange satisfied looks when they realize they actually work well as a team. Looking at the last fallen upperclassman, Lucius calmly asks if it is finally over. His three teammates stare at him in amazement, still processing how easy that victory was. Without wasting time celebrating, Lucius walks past the defeated students and tells the group to keep moving. Meanwhile, Kathy watches everything through a crystal sphere and realizes that the top 5 teams were eliminated within minutes. She becomes even more intrigued when she discovers that the ones responsible are freshmen. Kathy recognizes the talent of the members but quickly focuses her attention on the blonde-haired young man. The instructor realizes that Lucius is the center of that unusual team. With only a few words, he raised his teammates' morale and even defeated high-level upperclassmen by himself. Fascinated by his talent and leadership, Kathy wonders who that boy really is. Meanwhile, Lucius Elminster continues leading the group at high speed toward the heart of the forest. Hidden in the treetops, an enemy scout watches them approach through a spyglass. Farther ahead, several teams begin surrounding the massive central tree where the reward is hidden. As sunset approaches, different groups converge on the clearing at the same time. Lucius announces that they have reached their destination and reminds them that other teams are right behind them. As they enter the clearing, the four finally see the intense glow of the spiritual orb inside the tree trunk. The relic gives off a crystalline light that immediately awakens the greed of the competitors who made it that far. Hector, Lian, and Lucius charge straight ahead, trying to reach the prize before their rivals. Lucius smiles, knowing the artifact capable of awakening his power is only a few steps away. But he suddenly stops, spreads his arms, and orders everyone to halt. Lian complains because the others are getting ahead, but Lucius demands that she simply pay attention. The girl frowns as a deep tremor begins shaking the ground. The rumbling grows louder, and the silhouette of a gigantic creature begins emerging from beneath the tree. When they see what is awakening, Hector and Lian turn pale. The hooded mage shields himself from the wind, caused by the creature tearing through the ground. The monster rises from the depths like a nightmare, revealing enormous fangs and a gigantic mouth. The abyssal creature bursts from the earth with a roar, sending the upperclassmen running in panic. Desperation spreads through the clearing, and several participants flee to save their lives. While everyone else retreats, Lucius and his teammates stand firm before the creature. In the monitoring room, the assistants panic and shout for Kathy. One instructor demands that the exam be cancelled immediately and that reinforcements be sent. Kathy simply cracks her neck and sighs at her colleagues' panic. With a calm smile, she refuses the request and decides to keep the test running as it is, leaving the man furious. Walking calmly, Kathy says unexpected situations happen all the time. The man argues that this is insane, but she replies that anyone who dies there would have been beyond saving anyway. The atmosphere in the room grows heavy, and the staff turn pale at the instructor's coldness. Kathy says that anyone incapable of handling a situation like this would never survive on a real battlefield. The assistant swallows nervously, unable to think of a response. But moments later, Kathy laughs and reveals that she was only joking. She assures them that if the situation truly gets out of control, they can leave everything to the queen bee. The instructors finally breathe a sigh of relief, while Kathy watches the horizon, curious to see how the battle will end. Still watching the field, Kathy thinks that the presence of that beast in the exam area makes absolutely no sense. She narrows her eyes, suspicious that something is happening behind the scenes at the academy. Back in the clearing, several upperclassmen attack the creature with swords and spells in an attempt to restrain it. One warrior leaps forward with lightning surrounding his blade, while another student provides support. But the sword is violently repelled by the creature's scales and creates only a few sparks. The swordsman retreats in alarm when he realizes the monster's hide is being strengthened by the energy of the orb itself. Other mages combine wind and arcane projectiles, try to create an opening in its defense. Several explosions strike the creature and create a huge curtain of light and smoke. When the dust settles, their desperation grows as they realize nothing worked. The aquatic beast rises from the lake beneath the full moon without a single injury. The students panic, unable to believe that the group's strongest attacks had no effect. The creature moves its glowing tail through the water, leaving everyone unsure what to do. It then dives into the lake, creating violent waves as it prepares another attack. Suddenly, it erupts from the water with its mouth open, making the students run to avoid being devoured. But while everyone flees, one figure leaps from above and dives directly into the creature's mouth. The students are stunned, unable to understand whether the boy has completely lost his mind. Lucy's monster hangs in the air for an instant, face to face with the monster's fangs and red eyes. On the shore, Leon panics and screams that he is an idiot for doing something like that. Right before Hector and the redhead's eyes, Lucius is completely swallowed by the creature. Inside, however, he simply smiles and concentrates his mana to put his real plan into action. The monster closes its jaws and dives back into the depths of the lake. On the shore, Leanne and Hector remain frozen, staring at the water and unable to believe what they just saw. The creature's tail completely disappears, leaving only silence and the shock of the other students. An upperclassman wearing glasses mocks him and says inexperienced freshmen are only good at dying stupid deaths. Before he can finish, an intense glow begins appearing from inside the lake, disturbing the entire body of water. Another student points toward the center in alarm and warns the others about the phenomenon. Suddenly, the colossal creature is launched out of the water and flies toward the sky. The hooded mage notices the danger and warns that if something that large falls back into the lake, the wave will sweep across the entire area. High above them, the beast's body begins emitting an intense light from within. In a fraction of a second, a massive explosion tears the monster apart from the inside and shatters its body. Hector, Leanne, and the mage shield their faces from the shockwave, stunned by the destruction in the sky. The upperclassmen who had been mocking him are completely frozen. At the center of the explosion, Lucius appears calmly descending through the air. Everyone is shocked when they realize the freshman defeated the gigantic creature by himself. With a victorious smile, Lucius holds the coveted spiritual orb in his hands. Feeling the concentrated energy inside the sphere, he happily confirms that the reward is now his. Lucius lands calmly while hundreds of students stare at him in silence with a very different kind of respect than before. Hector and Leon are also unable to hide their admiration for what they just witnessed. With his golden eyes glowing, Lucius looks at the orb that may awaken the power from his previous life. Descending from the sky with an excited smile, Kathy officially announces the end of the test. Still holding the orb, Lucius looks at the instructor floating above them. Using the megaphone, Kathy orders everyone to return to the academy immediately. Silently, she gives an enigmatic smile, becoming even more intrigued by Lucius's potential. The group of four begins heading back through the forest, with the boy carrying the relic he just obtained. Along the way, defeated upperclassmen watch the freshmen who surpassed them with envy. Ignoring the stares, the four calmly follow the mist-covered trail. Hector confidently comments that the test was easy and that he wishes they had faced stronger opponents, while Leon boasts as well. The hooded mage gives a small laugh, joining the group's relaxed mood. Shortly afterward, Leon crosses her arms awkwardly and secretly glances at Lucius. Watching the young man's back ahead of her, she cannot hide her curiosity about his past. Leon wonders who he really is to be capable of displaying such unusual power. Lucius, unaware of her thoughts, keeps all his attention on the emerald orb in his hands. He examines the relic and confirms that it truly is an extremely pure source of spiritual energy. The artifact's density is impressive, exactly as Kathy explained. Lucius concludes that this concentration of energy could be the key to awakening his old battle circuit. Suddenly, a noise from the bushes interrupts the moment and puts the entire group on alert. The same enormous upperclassman from earlier appears between the trees, praising the freshman's strength. He and his partner wave in a friendly manner, saying they were so terrified by the monster that they could barely move. With a friendly expression, the man says he was impressed by the group and can hardly believe they are freshmen. Lucius simply turns and gives the newcomer his usual suspicious stare. The upperclassman praises all four of them, saying he has become a fan of their team and inflating Leanne and Hector's egos. He then extends his hand and suggests they become friends, offering his experience at the academy to help them. Leanne hesitates, but the man's seemingly friendly attitude makes her lower her guard. With a smile, she decides to accept the handshake. But the instant their hands are about to touch, the entire atmosphere changes. The upperclassman's smile disappears and is replaced by a cold expression. In a treacherous move, he attacks Leia at point-blank range. The girl does not even have time to react and widens her eyes at the betrayal. The blow sends her flying, kicking up dust and debris along the way. Hector and the hooded mage freeze when they see their teammate taken down so quickly. Leanne falls unconscious among the debris, completely defenseless. Lucius appears in an instant and catches the girl, coldly asking what that man thinks he is doing. With restrained fury in his eyes, he warns him that the test is already over. The upperclassman approaches with a dark smile while several accomplices emerge from between the trees. Looking at Lucius like prey, he praises the boy's talent in a sinister tone. According to the man, that group of freshmen is the most valuable prey they could possibly find. Hector draws his sword while trembling with anger, feeling the murderous intent coming from the upperclassmen. With a sinister smile, the leader asks if they have ever heard of the swamp dwellers. The enemy group surrounds the freshmen in the middle of the forest, revealing that this was a real ambush. Recognizing the name, the hooded mage begins trembling, terrified by the men's identity. The leader explains that there is only one rule for staying at the academy every year. The bottom 125 students are expelled, meaning anyone can remain there indefinitely as long as they avoid the lowest positions. With a cynical smile, he says they were never strong enough to earn a blessing, but they were also never ranked poorly enough to be expelled. Because of that, students like them simply grow older, trapped at the academy year after year with no future ahead of them. It was precisely because they remained stagnant like that they became known as the swamp dwellers. Without losing his composure, Lucius directly asks what they really want. The man says they spent far too long trapped in the middle of the rankings until they grew old without ever reaching the top. Bitterly, he admits the shame became so great that they eventually lost even the right to carry their own family names. The silver-haired girl draws her sword and mocks them, calling them washed-up old men who remain there out of cowardice. Overcome with rage, the man grabs his head and screams that he lost everything, and someone in a situation does not have many options for starting over. With an insane look, he says they will do anything to obtain a blessing and recover what they lost. A massive magical hourglass begins releasing sinister purple energy behind the group as they swear nothing will stop them. Seeing the strange artifact, the swordswoman is stunned and asks if the thing inside it is a corpse. The interior is filled with human skulls submerged in purple magic, releasing an aura that immediately puts the hooded mage on alert. A magic circle appears beneath his feet as streams of black energy begin spreading outward. The spell erupts into a storm of power that covers the clearing with suffocating pressure. Instead of being intimidated, however, the huge man simply gives a confident smile. The upperclassmen raise their arms toward the artifact and receive that energy as if performing some kind of ritual. The warrior grits her teeth when she realizes the magic did not have the expected effect and keeps her guard raised. Black vortices appear over the attacker's hands and begin channeling the flow of mana directed at them. The energy spirals around and is easily absorbed by the upperclassmen. The hourglass begins bubbling and glowing intensely as the leader absorbs the concentrated power. The two touch the relic in ecstasy, feeling that enormous amount of energy flood their bodies. Overcome by greed, the huge man extends his hand and threatens to drain all the freshmen's life energy until they die. The hooded mage suffers the backlash of his own energy and shouts for everyone to retreat. The attacker laughs wildly, completely intoxicated by the amount of mana he continues absorbing. Seeing her weakened teammate on his knees, the swordswoman quickly moves in front of him. The enemy maintains his connection with the relic, determined to extract every last drop of energy from his victims. Realizing the artifact is the source of the problem, the girl fixes her eyes on the hourglass and decides to destroy it. She leaps forward with her sword in hand and charges directly toward the magical jar. The blade comes down hard on the structure, trying to end the effect in one strike, but the attack rebounds off a barrier without leaving a single mark. The girl is shocked when she realizes her physical attack had no effect. Taking advantage of the opening, the huge man grabs her from behind and mocks her attempt. As he begins draining her strength through contact, he explains that only the people who activated the jar can touch it. Seeing his teammate trapped, Lucius immediately charges toward the enemy. As he closes the distance, he analyzes the ability within moments. Lucius concludes that the jar absorbs any magical attack directed toward it, and also automatically drains the energy of anyone who makes physical contact with its users. Understanding the trap, he immediately changes strategies. Lucius launches himself through the air and attacks the huge man to break his grip and free the girl. A flying kick lands directly on the man's face and catches him completely off guard. The impact sends the brute flying away and immediately frees the swordswoman. The enemy slams hard into the ground and raises a cloud of dust while Lucius lands calmly. With a smile, he confirms that ordinary physical attacks work perfectly against the technique. In the middle of the smoke, the leader runs over worriedly to check on his partner. Lucius walks past the sword lying on the ground while the swordswoman tries to support herself and regain her balance. Still panting after having her mana drained, she watches the situation in surprise. The girl asks what Lucius plans to do, reminding him that he is a mage and should not be fighting up close. But the boy grabs the sword's hilt and simply replies that she is wrong. Lucius holds the weapon with a perfect and natural stance, making it clear that he knows exactly how to use it. With an intimidating stare, he begins saying that his real training has always been. The upperclassmen recover and stare at Lucius, unable to understand the sudden change. The training of a swordsman, making it clear that magic was never his only way of fighting. A dangerous aura surrounds Lucius as he assumes an offensive stance. In a fraction of a second, he shifts his body weight and prepares to charge. His eyes reveal the confidence of someone who knows exactly what he is about to do. Seeing him with a sword, the upperclassmen become confused and can hardly believe what they are seeing. The huge man mocks him and asks if the little mage decided to play swordsman. Confidently, he charges forward saying that he will break the amateur's sword in half. But Lucius slips beneath the attack and lands several rapid slashes on both enemies. One upperclassman coughs up blood and is thrown backward without even understanding what hit him. The other tries to react on instinct, completely terrified by the boy's speed. Lucius gives him no room to breathe or prepare a counterattack. With a fluid movement, he adjusts his grip while desperation appears in his opponent's eyes. The upperclassman attempts a desperate strike, but Lucius easily dodges and slips directly inside his guard. A slash crosses the man's chest and ends any possibility of resistance. As he falls to his knees, a red-haired girl watches the battle from a distance, completely amazed. Unable to believe it, she murmurs that this cannot be real. Lucius remains calm as if defeating two upperclassmen was nothing more than a warm-up. He lowers the sword before the fallen bodies and takes complete control of the situation. The swordswoman is amazed that he performs such a refined technique without using mana or battle spirit. She cannot understand how someone so young could have achieved such mastery. Seeing both of his allies defeated, the third member of the group begins panicking on top of the hourglass. Desperate, he asks them to calm down and admits that he thought Lucius was just another mage kid. But then he tries convincing himself that without battle spirit, the boy is still nothing more than a 12-year-old child. Regaining some courage, he gives a sick smile and thinks he only needs to stay calm to turn the fight around. The upperclassman places his hand on the artifact to draw more power while Lucius simply watches. The man's body begins swelling and developing grotesque muscles fueled by the hourglass's energy. Transformed into a giant of brute strength, he arrogantly asks Lucius what he thinks of it. Before he can even finish, Lucius charges and slashes across his chest from one side to the other. The huge man simply laughs and claims that a sword wielded by someone without spiritual energy could never pierce his body. He boasts that his defense comes from all the energy they have stolen over the years. The monster launches himself through the air and tells Lucius to prepare to be crushed. Lucius responds with a rapid sequence of strikes to stop the charge. The brute throws a heavy punch toward his face, but the boy dodges with precision. Even so, the pressure from the attack strikes Lucius and creates a powerful shockwave. Dragged by the force of the impact, he realizes the situation has become more dangerous. Lucius slides backward across the ground while looking for an opening to counterattack. The enemy keeps up the pressure with heavy attacks, forcing him farther and farther back. Analyzing his own strikes, Lucius concludes that physical strength alone is not enough to break through that defense. He tries another series of slashes, but the sword only produces sparks against the opponent's hardened muscles. Lucius remembers that in his previous life, a body like that would have been as fragile as paper, but his current 12-year-old body lacks the same strength without battle spirit. The huge man attacks again, forcing Lucius to rely on all his agility to avoid being hit. Frustrated that he cannot land a strike, the man roars that he has lost his patience. Overcome with anger, he charges again and shouts that the brat is really starting to annoy him. Lucius leaps backward with a flip, creating distance while the redhead watches anxiously. Supporting her weakened teammate, the girl shouts when she realizes the massive disadvantage in the fight. Lucius lands firmly in the clearing, feeling the air pressure caused by the pursuit. The brute laughs and admits that the boy's swordsmanship surprised him, but mocks the lack of power behind his strikes. According to him, a child is still a child, and without battle spirit, that sword is nothing more than a baby's tantrum. Ignoring the provocation, Lucius remains crouched as a green sphere begins appearing in front of him. Feeling his heart pounding, he recognizes a familiar sensation awakening inside his body. An emerald aura surrounds Lucius, confirming that the battle spirit circuits from his previous life are finally reacting. With his hand extended, he realizes that he now has exactly the power needed to turn the battle around. Unaware of what is happening, the giant gathers a massive amount of dark mana to attack. Lucius holds the sphere of energy and begins manipulating it the same way he did in the past. He squeezes the glowing relic between his fingers and activates the flow of power. An emerald explosion spreads in every direction, forming a complex magical pattern around his body. Streams of energy spiral around and compress until all that power is concentrated into a single point. The energy core is absorbed into Lucius's body and forces his internal circuits open. He raises his face as his eyes glow gold and absorbs all that power. The connection is completed in an instant, flooding his muscles with supernatural strength. A shockwave breaks the silence of the clearing and releases enormous pressure around him. Lucius's eyes burn like flames, revealing the power that had been sleeping inside him. Overcome with excitement, he grips his clothes and smiles as he feels that he has finally awakened. The battle spirit circuit he mastered in his previous life, now active inside his new body. Feeling the enormous murderous pressure suddenly appear, the brute immediately stops, terrified. Lucius realizes that because he forced the circuit open using the sphere, his young body is under tremendous pressure. The sword begins vibrating with a scarlet aura, and he calculates that he will only have enough energy for a single strike. Realizing the danger too late, the upperclassman widens his eyes at that overwhelming presence. A pillar of scarlet battle spirit erupts around Lucius as he decides to end everything with a single attack. Faced with that suffocating pressure, the brute is paralyzed by fear. With a cold gaze, Lucius declares that eliminating opponent in one strike has always been his true specialty. Sensing the danger, the man desperately tries to run toward the hourglass. His companion on top of the jar screams in panic for him not to get hit. But it is already too late. Lucius shoots after the enemy like a scarlet bolt. He delivers a diagonal slash that tears through the air and completely engulfs the giant's body. When the dust settles, the brute falls defeated and unconscious as Lucius completes the movement. The crimson aura slowly disappears from the blade, marking the end of the confrontation. Immediately after the attack, Lucius drops to his knees, completely exhausted by the sudden loss of energy. Taking a deep breath, he confirms that his current limit really was only one attack. Even so, he is satisfied to realize that his battle spirit kit has finally been unlocked. Although it is still incomplete and depends on energy spheres to channel power, the first step has been taken. A small smile appears on his face at such a promising result. Lucius now knows exactly what path he needs to follow to recover the strength he possessed in his previous life. At that moment, the hooded young man runs over worriedly, calling Lucius's name in relief. The red-haired girl also approaches, staring at Lucius with a mixture of shock and curiosity. Still stunned, she demands to know what kind of power he just released. Under the moonlight, the dust finally begins settling, marking the end of the battle in the forest. His hooded friend asks if Lucius is alright, and he calmly replies that he did not suffer any serious injuries. The silver-haired figure enters the conversation and addresses Lucius by his surname Elminster. Lucius turns when he notices the warrior's serious and suspicious tone. The swordsman says the mastery Lucius demonstrated could only belong to someone with decades of training. With a piercing stare, he demands to know which legendary master taught Lucius the technique. The atmosphere grows tense as he waits for an explanation from the boy. The two stare at each other in silence, sizing one another up. Lucius, however, prefers to keep his secrets and reveal nothing about his previous life. Shortly afterward, back in the academy courtyard, the redhead excitedly celebrates the group's massive rise in the rankings. The hooded young man agrees, reminding them that everyone obtained their spiritual energy spheres. Now ranked 26th, Lilia Magner teases No and says she will not lose to him again. No Raven, ranked 29th, simply smiles beneath his hood and says he will let her win this time. Hector Arclight, now ranked 25th, remains silent with his usual serious expression. Internally, however, he is still bothered by the impressive sword technique he saw Lucius use. As they walk through the halls, the group watches Lucius ahead of them, still impressed by his performance. Now ranked 19th, Lucius Elminster thinks about the martial circuit he finally managed to unlock. He recognizes that his reserves are still insufficient to activate it by himself and that he needs a massive increase in his amount of spiritual energy to fight at full strength whenever he wants. When they reach the main hall, they find a crowd of students gathered around an announcement. The board announces the 27th edition of the traditional Imperial betting tournament. Seeing all the commotion, the group looks at the poster to find out what it is about. Lucius repeats the tournament's name, intrigued by the idea. Suddenly, a woman's hand appears from above as an excited voice confirms his question. Floating upside down, a woman asks if he is interested, startling Noel. She comments on the group's impressive performance in the previous exercise and thanks them for making the upperclassmen's elimination easier. Lucius does not fall for her charm and directly asks if that was all she wanted. Floating through the courtyard, the instructor laughs and comments that he seems pretty curious about the tournament. She explains that it is a major combat competition sponsored by the Empire, bringing together powerful warriors from many different places. Some students comment that the event is nothing more than a betting spectacle for the nobles. Another remembers the rumors about brutal deaths during the fights. Completely casually, the instructor confirms that many of those rumors are true. She approaches one of the frightened boys and points out something important about the arena. The structure was built to accumulate all the spiritual energy released during combat. Because of that, any fighter who remains on the stage naturally absorbs part of that energy. The farther the rounds progress, the greater the concentration accumulated inside the arena becomes. And the longer someone keeps winning, the greater the permanent expansion of their reserves will be. The information immediately catches Lucy's attention, while Lilia remains suspicious. The woman adds that the tournament is external and does not affect the academy rankings, serving only as a test of skill. Most students lose interest, thinking it is far too dangerous to participate in something that does not even award ranking points. While Lilia complains that the whole thing seems suspicious, Lucius keeps thinking about the energy stored inside the arena. He concludes that if he wins several fights in a row, he could absorb an enormous amount of spiritual energy. Without hesitation, Lucius calls out to the instructor before she leaves. The woman stops in midair and turns around, surprised that he is genuinely interested. Lucius asks where he needs to register, leaving Lilia shocked by his decision. The instructor descends toward him and smiles, saying that she will personally handle his registration. She leans closer to tell him something privately, while Lilia gets annoyed in the background by the nickname the woman uses. In a secretive tone, she warns him that the students ranked 4th, 10th, and 15th will also participate. She then flies away with a playful smile and wishes Lucius good luck. Far from being intimidated by those elite students, he simply smiles confidently. The scene shifts to the tournament's massive coliseum, where the master of ceremonies enthusiastically welcomes the audience. He explains the rules to the nobles and details how the betting and winnings work for each match. As the fighters advance, the odds change, making the early rounds a better opportunity for huge profits. The announcer fires up the crowd and encourages everyone to bet heavily from the very beginning. Among the nobles, some mock the debut of a 12-year-old boy and treat his fight like a joke. Meanwhile, Lucius calmly walks toward the center of the Colosseum, ignoring the comments. He observes the competitors and notices that many of them truly possess an impressive amount of energy. Veteran warriors and enormous men wait for their turn surrounded by intimidating auras. Lucius notices that the 3 highly ranked students mentioned by the instructor have not arrived yet. At the center of the arena, the announcer raises his voice to introduce the first fight. The magical screens display the matchup between a veteran brute and Lucius Elminster. The commentator highlights the enormous size difference between the two and introduces the newcomer to the audience. He then announces the opponent Garzas, a warrior chosen by the respected Northern Escort Corps. In the stands, Lilia is surprised and comments that the Northern troops are one of the Empire's most prestigious elite units. Hector coldly confirms the reputation and high level of the soldiers in that group. Faced with such an apparently one-sided matchup, the nobles celebrate the opportunity to bet on what they consider a guaranteed victory. As gold coins pour into the bets, the master of ceremonies announces that the fight is about to begin. Other competitors laugh and tell Garzas not to be too rough with the child. The commentator explains that the fighters' spiritual energy will accumulate inside the pillars until they are full. Wielding a gigantic axe, Garza smiles at Lucius with bloodlust. Lucius remains completely calm, showing no fear whatsoever. The referee raises the enchanted hammer to give the starting signal. With a thunderous strike, he authorizes the beginning of the fight as the crowd erupts with excitement. Garza charges like a bull, raising the axe to crush Lucius. Lilia leans over the railing, startled by the speed of such a massive man. Already in front of the boy, Garza swings a deadly blow and shouts for him to die. Lucius simply watches the weapon descend and calmly analyzes the way Garza uses the axe. At the right moment, he extends his hand and blocks the strike with a concentrated burst of magic. Garza's eyes widen when he sees his full power attack stop with ease. Lucius releases an explosion of pressure and sends his opponent flying backward. The Northern Warrior screams as he is launched through the air without being able to react. Maintaining his casting stance, Lucius controls the flow of wind with perfect precision. With a confident smile and a sharp gaze, Lucius makes it clear that the fight had already been decided from the very beginning. Garza crashes face first into the Colosseum floor and falls completely unconscious in front of the crowd. In the stands, the nobles freeze as they watch what they considered safe bets turn to dust within seconds. Even the extravagant announcer is left speechless, swallowing hard at the result. Slowly recovering his voice, he shouts that the fight is over and declares Lucius Elminster the winner. The audience erupts into chaos, with furious nobles complaining about losing 100 million zeni. The announcer goes wild on the microphone, highlighting the historic upset decided by a single blow from the super rookie. Relieved by the result, Lilia nervously starts biting the wooden railing, earning a scolding from Hector. While the entire stadium tries to understand who this prodigy is, streams of energy begin wrapping around Lucius on the stage. Clenching his fist, he realizes that the energy absorbed during the first round is still not enough to activate his circuit. In his second fight against Belunder Gillen, Lucius moves like lightning and drops his opponent with a punch to the stomach. The Master of Ceremonies screams in amazement at yet another one-hit knockout. Desperate after their earlier losses, several nobles rush to change their bets and put everything on the newcomer. On the stage, Lucius continues steamrolling his opponents without giving them practically any chance to react. The announcer goes crazy as he calls out 3 consecutive and extremely quick victories. At only 12 years old, Lucius has already become the tournament's biggest surprise. In the stands, the instructor celebrates wildly while waving the bundles of money she won, irritating Lilia. Meanwhile, Hector watches every detail in silence, becoming increasingly impressed and unsettled by the boy's power. Absorbing the spiritual energy accumulated inside the arena, Lucius realizes he still needs much more to reach his goal. In the highest and most luxurious box in the Colosseum, an imposing presence begins moving through the shadows. Suddenly, Lucius feels overwhelming pressure and raises his eyes toward the upper box. A gigantic figure emerges from the shadows and walks heavily toward the front. Weaves of energy and purple lightning radiate from the area, covering the stadium in crushing pressure. The announcer swallows hard and admits he never imagined they would receive such an important guest. From his private box above, the man stares directly at Lucius standing alone on the stage. Lucius keeps his stance firm, feeling the weight of that gaze coming from the top of the arena. The newcomer takes another step forward and reveals an imposing scarlet cloak. He clenches his fist so tightly that a drop of blood runs down it, while intense bloodlust fills the atmosphere. The entire Colosseum falls silent as Lucius faces that figure for the first time in this new life. He's a gigantic veteran with long white hair, red eyes, and imposing armor. When their eyes meet, a spark of recognition and rivalry appears in Lucius's gaze. That man is Atlas, one of the most powerful and feared individuals in the entire empire. The tension rises as Lucius's past finally appears before him in the present. The announcer fires up the crowd again and announces the unexpected arrival of an extremely special guest. In the boxes, the nobles are stunned, unable to understand what the leader of the empire's greatest swordsman family is doing there. The atmosphere changes immediately, and even the competitors feel the pressure caused by his presence. The commentator then confirms the man's identity: Duke Atlas, the feared patriarch of the Arclight family. Hearing the name, Lucius looks directly toward the upper balcony and stares at the man who defined his previous life. From above, Atlas looks at the boy and thinks contemptuously that a bloodline of mages like the Elminsters is nothing more than a joke. But after staring at him for a few more seconds, something about the boy catches his attention. Atlas notices the firmness and bloodlust in the eyes of a mere child, although he cannot understand why all that hostility seems directed at him. Rather than feeling intimidated, the experienced Duke finds the boy's boldness quite interesting. On the other side, Lucius grits his teeth and reminds himself that he needs to be patient. The rage burns so intensely in his chest that he nearly loses control in front of the man who destroyed his previous life. Clutching his clothes as his heart pounds, Lucius takes a deep breath to keep himself from ruining his plans on impulse. He knows the time has not yet come to make that bastard experience the same despair. In the middle of the tension, the announcer receives an urgent message and looks visibly surprised. He grabs the microphone again and announces that breaking news has completely changed the stakes of the tournament. The nobles pay attention as he begins revealing an unprecedented reward for the champion. With his chin resting on his gloved hand, Atlas allows the special prize to be announced. Whoever wins the entire competition will earn the right to step onto the stage and personally face Duke Atlas himself. The commentator reminds everyone that witnessing the Duke's legendary swordsmanship in action is an extremely rare opportunity. The crowd begins roaring at the chance to see the Empire's most powerful blade in combat. The announcer can barely hide his own excitement over how much bigger the event has suddenly become. The entire arena erupts into cheers and celebration. At the center of the stage, however, Lucius remains still with his face partially hidden by shadows. A cold smile appears at the corner of his mouth when he realizes how perfectly everything has fallen into place. Having the opportunity to face Atlas on that stage in front of the entire empire is exactly the scenario he wanted. With fury filling his eyes, Lucius decides that this is where he will begin digging the grave of his greatest enemy. The commentator returns his attention to the tournament and officially announces the Block A final. On the other side of the arena, a long-haired man smiles and comments that he never imagined seeing a child make it this far. Lucius completely ignores the provocation and only thinks about ending the fight quickly so he can reach Atlas. His eyes remain fixed on the Duke's box, as if the opponent standing before him does not even exist. Realizing he is being ignored, his opponent feels deeply insulted. Furious, he releases an enormous amount of emerald mana filled with lightning. Shouting angrily, he warns that if Lucius wants to die so badly, he will gladly grant his wish. A torrent of magical energy is launched at full force toward the boy, illuminating the arena. The blast strikes the center of the stage directly, but Lucius remains standing through the impact. In an instant, all that energy simply dissolves into the air, revealing the boy completely unharmed. His opponent is left speechless after seeing his high-density magic neutralized so easily. Without wasting time, Lucius surrounds his arm with blue lightning and launches his attack. He releases a circular wave of electricity across the ground and charges forward at high speed. The strike hits his opponent and causes an explosion that sends stones and smoke across the arena. The dust begins settling as everyone waits to see the result. In the middle of it, the opponent appears on the ground, clutching his head and unable to continue. Terrified, he immediately admits defeat and begs Lucius to spare his life. In the stands, Lily is stunned by the power she just witnessed. No also realizes that Lucius's presence feels much more frightening than before. Completely calmly, the boy shuts off the electricity as if it took no effort at all. The announcer is speechless at the sight of a 12-year-old boy dominating the competition like this. He screams that Lucius is officially the champion of Block A. With determination in his eyes, Lucius thinks that only one more fight remains before reaching his true objective. High above, Atlas watches the young winner seriously and analyzes every detail of the battle. Without slowing down, the announcer introduces the grand final of Block B. The first competitor called is Gladys Foreign, ranked 10th at the Royal Academy and a former tournament champion. But when Estelle's name is announced, her side of the field remains completely empty. Confused, the announcer searches for the girl while the audience wonders where she is. The nobles quickly begin saying that she ran away in fear, while the referee keeps calling for her to appear. Dragging a huge stuffed rabbit along the ground, Estelle finally appears and asks if it is already her turn. On the other side, Gladys looks at the girl seriously, prepared for any surprise. The nobles watch curiously, unable to understand how someone who looks so fragile reached the final. Estelle simply yawns along the way as if she is dying of boredom. With a sleepy smile, she seems completely unconcerned by the danger in front of her. The announcer asks if she is finally ready to begin. With both competitors in position, the Block B match begins. Estelle remains completely relaxed in front of her opponent. Gladys decides he will not hold back just because he is facing a younger girl. The signal echoes throughout the stadium, and the two prepare to fight. Gladys spreads his arms and manifests several golden magic circles, planning to end things without making her suffer. Dozens of crests surround Estelle from every direction while she simply sits down hugging the rabbit. Radiant energy gathers above her, preparing a barrage of spells. Faced with the threat, Estelle simply closes her eyes and maintains a faint smile. Gladys fires dozens of golden projectiles at full power to end the fight. At the last instant, however, the girl's eyes open and reveal a sinister purple glow. A massive explosion of energy fills the center of the arena and completely covers the place where Estelle was standing. The Colosseum falls silent as the flash finally begins to disappear. The announcer looks at the field, unable to understand exactly what just happened. In the boxes, the nobles are horrified by the scene that appears. The stuffed rabbit floats covered in blood while Estelle quietly giggles amid the destruction. Her cute expression has disappeared, replaced by an empty and disturbing stare. Gladys lies in a pool of blood, and the referee declares that he is unable to continue. The announcer declares Estelle's overwhelming victory while she tosses the stuffed animal into the air as if nothing happened. The nobles are shocked to see a former champion defeated so quickly. The commentator confirms that Estelle has won Block B, and that the grand final of the tournament has finally been decided. Lucius walks with firm steps toward the center of the arena to compete for the title. The two young prodigies finally stand face to face. Estelle lets out another yawn, acting as though she is about to fall asleep. Lucius keeps his gaze cold and attentive, prepared for anything. The announcer raises the excitement of the crowd even further and announces the most anticipated moment. The final will be Estelle against Lucius Elminster. In the stands, Hector analyzes the girl and remembers watching all of her previous fights. A short-haired upperclassman appears beside him and comments that no one really understands how Estelle's magic works. She explains that the girl ranks 4th despite almost never attending classes, and she would not reveal her abilities so easily. Even so, the upperclassman admits there is something about Estelle that keeps bothering her. Meanwhile, pillars of fire ignite and the referee starts the grand final. Estelle yawns again while calmly hugging her stuffed animal. Behind her drowsiness, however, her eyes glow pink as she complains about being tired of so many fights. Lucius carefully watches every movement to avoid being caught off guard. Estelle decides to finish quickly and covers the rabbit with a crimson aura while also giving it boxing gloves. In the stands, the upperclassman finally notices the detail. Estelle's aura detection reacts as though there are two people on the field. Her eyes widen when she realizes what kind of advanced magic the girl is using. At that moment, the rabbit shoots across the ground at high speed. The force of its movement is so great that it destroys the stone floor. The stuffed animal throws a heavy punch, but Lucius dodges at the last moment. Seeing the wall behind him crack from the impact, Lucius recognizes the creature's impressive speed. He quickly changes position while the rabbit begins chasing him again. The puppet follows up with another fast attack. Dodging in midair, Lucius realizes the absurd precision and strength with which the doll is being controlled. This is clearly far beyond ordinary puppet manipulation. The rabbit gathers energy to attack again while Estelle watches everything from a distance. Lucius realizes that the technique copies the user's own aura source, transfers that duplicate into an object and allows both to be controlled independently at the same time. After escaping another attack, he makes a decision. Now that he understands the magic, Lucius ignores the doll and charges directly toward Estelle. The girl remains seated, watching him approach without showing any concern. But the rabbit appears at absurd speed and blocks his path. Lucius responds with an electrical attack and sends the creature flying away. Seeing his attempt fail, Estelle gives a slight mocking smile. Lucius gathers a large amount of lightning in the palm of his hand. His senses detect a new threat coming from above. Another rabbit appears in the air holding a gigantic hammer filled with energy. The weapon comes crashing down at full force toward Lucius. The hammer strikes the floor and creates a massive crater in the arena. The audience is shocked when the commentator realizes there is a second stuffed rabbit on the field. The announcer shouts in panic, thinking Lucius was hit, but a gust of wind begins clearing away all the smoke. Relieved, the commentator sees Lucius outside the crater and confirms that he managed to escape. The boy is almost completely unharmed with only a small scratch on his forearm. The crowd erupts at the sight of his reflexes. Estelle adjusts her hair and praises Lucius in a mocking tone. She then warns that she will make an exception and show him all of her puppets at once. Lucius narrows his eyes and keeps his guard up after hearing the warning. An enormous amount of crimson mana begins overflowing from the girl's body. From the shadows on the ground, another stuffed creature emerges with sharp teeth. Feeling the pressure increase, Lucius prepares himself for the real danger. The announcer is left speechless as several monsters begin emerging from the dark pools spread around the arena. Even Atlas begins watching more closely as the commentator describes the scene as a true nightmare. In total, 6 stuffed creatures surround Estelle, ready to attack. With a sadistic smile, she orders all of them to go play with Lucius. The monsters leap together and surround the boy from every direction. Lucius spins through the air and intercepts the first creature with a precise strike. Immediately afterward, he slips beneath another gigantic stuffed animal armed with blades. Moving quickly, he avoids several consecutive attacks. A precise kick strikes another creature in the face and creates an opening in the encirclement. But the sharp-toothed bear appears from behind and nearly hits his head. The attack grazes Lucius's face, making him realize he cannot keep doing nothing but defending. The moment he lands, 2 huge monsters are already above him carrying massive swords. Lucius extends his hand and prepares a long-range electrical technique. A discharge strikes one of the creatures and paralyzes its movements. Lucius notices that the dolls have no eyes and realizes they locate their target by tracking aura. With their weakness revealed, an idea forms in his mind. He slides across the ground and plants his feet firmly to carry out the plan. Lucius closes his fist and begins controlling his own energy to deceive the creature's senses. High above, Atlas notices the sudden change in the boy's aura and becomes intrigued. All of the puppets attack the point where they sense his energy at the same time. In the stands, Lilia panics when she sees him apparently trapped with no way out. Estelle licks her lips and celebrates too early, convinced that she has won. But Lucius moves at high speed beneath the monsters and charges directly toward her. With a confident smile, he prepares his fist for the decisive attack. At the last instant, however, he throws a fragment infused with his own aura into the air. The crystal releases a strong pulse of mana above them. Fooled by the false signal, all the creatures take their attention off Lucius and look upward. The announcer cannot understand why the puppets suddenly stopped. He quickly realizes that all of them seem drawn toward the light above the arena. Lucius smiles when he confirms that his trap worked. The puppets fly toward the fragment and end up gathered in the same place. Pointing toward the crystal, Lucius activates the concentrated energy. A massive electrical explosion fills the sky and destroys all the stuffed creatures at once. Lucius calmly lowers his arm while the remains of the creatures disappear. On the arena floor, he remains completely unharmed after clearing the battlefield. The crowd goes wild at the speed of thought the boy just demonstrated. In the stands, the short-haired upperclassman widens her eyes at what she just witnessed. She realizes that Lucius managed to copy the principle behind Estelle's aura replication technique in only a few seconds. He had placed a copy of his own energy signature inside a stone and used it to attract the creatures. Even though it worked, Lucius recognizes that it is still far from the true replication he wants to master. Either way, he achieved his objective and eliminated every puppet protecting Estelle. Looking at the girl, Lucius declares that playtime is over. Estelle remains in the same place, standing face to face with him and with her back toward the crowd. Instead of feeling intimidated, she simply lets out a strange laugh. Lucius feels the ground tremble and realizes the fight is still not over. An enormous amount of dark crimson mana erupts around Estelle, distorting the space nearby. Floating in the middle of that energy, she says it has been a long time since anyone forced her to fight seriously. With a sinister smile, she reveals that all the aura previously divided among the puppets has now returned to her body. Lucius feels the weight of that concentrated energy. In the boxes, the nobles panic in the face of such overwhelming power. The announcer completely loses his composure, unable to describe what he is seeing. Behind Estelle, a gigantic creature made of energy and sharp teeth begins rising. Even in front of that presence, Lucius does not retreat and instead smiles. The enormous beast roars and releases shockwaves throughout the arena. Lucius recognizes that this is the true power of the Academy's fourth-ranked student, far beyond his previous opponents. Estelle watches confidently, certain that nothing will be able to withstand that power. Knowing an ordinary attack will not be enough, Lucius decides to bet everything. He releases all the different energies he absorbed during the tournament at the same time. Green lightning and flames begin swirling around his body. Lucius compresses that entire mixture directly into his fist. Taking his combat stance, he gathers every last drop of energy he has left. With determination, he prepares the most powerful attack he can produce at that moment. High above, Atlas widens his eyes when he feels a strangely familiar presence coming from the boy. Lucius compresses all the multicolored energy until it becomes a dark and dense sphere in his hand. He pulls his arm back as black lightning and sparks tear through the air. In an instant, he extends his hand and aims directly at the core of the enormous creature. With a fierce smile, Lucius unleashes his final technique at Estelle. The colossal creature roars and releases a torrent of wind and crimson mana. Estelle smiles, certain that she is about to end the fight. Lucy shoots across the ground and charges directly at the beast. Irritated by his boldness, Estelle shouts for him to disappear. The monster raises its massive arm and launches a strike capable of crushing everything in its path. Lucius's attack collides head-on with the creature and creates a blinding flash at the point of impact. At that moment, Estelle's smile disappears when she feels the force of his counterattack. Lucius uses every last drop of mana and continues pushing forward without retreating. His piercing spell tears through the dense aura forming the monster. The attack opens a massive hole through the creature's structure and destabilizes its form. The explosion throws the monster backward and sends Estelle flying as well. The girl is launched through the air while her summon begins dissolving into smoke. Unable to believe the result, Estelle widens her eyes. The crimson energy fades into the air while Lucius remains standing. The force of the impact also pushes the boy backward while Estelle lands safely on her stuffed animal. Lucius's foot strikes the ground hard and cracks the stones near the edge of the arena. He continues sliding until he finally manages to stop. On the other side, Estelle comfortably slides along on the rabbit and finishes without any serious injuries. The announcer screams in amazement that Lucius managed to destroy that colossal creature. The entire arena falls into suspense as he questions what the official result will be. In the boxes, the nobles lean forward waiting for the verdict. Atlas carefully observes the exact positions of both competitors. Then everyone finally notices where Lucius stopped after being pushed back. Estelle notices the detail as well and widens her eyes. Blood runs from Lucius's injured fingers onto the stones beyond the line marking the arena's boundary. The referee announces that despite destroying the creature, Lucius crossed outside the permitted area. According to the rules, Estelle is declared the tournament champion. The audience laments the closed result, while some bettors celebrate recovering their money. Lucius's teammates are devastated to see such an impressive victory slip away because of the arena boundary. Lucius remains kneeling in silence, processing the unexpected defeat. Gritting his teeth, he feels the frustration of losing his chance to face Atlas burning inside his chest. Estelle approaches with her stuffed animals and sincerely acknowledges the boy's strength. Introducing herself as Estelle Rabbitwraith, ranked 4th, she says that maybe attending classes again will finally be worthwhile. Lucius remains silent while trying to process everything that just happened. Before leaving, Estelle says she cannot wait for the duel tournament taking place 3 years from now. She also recommends that Lucius visit the infirmary to take care of his arm. As the girl walks away, Lucius feels an enormous presence approaching and turns his head. His eyes widen when he sees that figure entering the field. Duke Atlas has personally descended into the arena and is now looking down at Lucius. With firm steps and his red cloak flowing behind him, the patriarch of the Arclight family walks past him. Looking at Atlas's back, Lucius realizes that he does not necessarily have to follow the tournament's rules. Electric sparks begin appearing between his fingers. Lucius turns with a murderous gaze, determined not to waste this opportunity. Without hesitation, he charges at Atlas from behind with the clear intention of killing him. The Duke senses him approaching and coldly asks if he really intends to attempt a surprise attack. Lucius closes the distance, ready to land a fatal blow. Suddenly, a powerful impact interrupts the attack and sends blood scattering through the air. The announcer fires up the crowd again and announces the long-awaited exhibition match between Estelle and Atlas. With both of them at the center of the Colosseum, the exhibition battle officially begins. Atlas maintains a firm stance while facing his new opponent. Estelle yawns and complains that fighting an old man after Lucius does not sound fun at all. With a dark expression, she says she just wants to finish quickly so she can go back to sleep. At high speed, Estelle races behind the Duke to try to catch him off guard. She laughs and calls him an old man while preparing her attack. Several puppets armed with scythes appear around Atlas. Estelle gives a mocking bow as she orders the creatures to tear their target apart. The massive blades come crashing directly down onto the Duke. A thunderous impact echoes through the stadium as the weapons strike the place where he is standing. standing. The commentator has to shield his face from the powerful blast of wind created by the impact. He is left speechless when he looks toward the center of the field. As soon as the dust settles, Atlas appears standing completely unharmed. With a cold gaze, he makes the enormous difference in power between them painfully clear. In an instant, Atlas steps on Estelle's head and pins her against the bloodstained ground. In the stands, students and spectators are horrified by the brutality of the scene. The announcer nearly chokes as he announces that the tournament champion was defeated in a fraction of a second. Atlas remains standing over the fallen girl, making his absolute superiority clear. Showing no interest whatsoever in his defeated opponent, the Duke turns his attention toward the other side. From a distance, Lucius releases such intense bloodlust that it immediately catches Atlas's attention. The Duke calmly asks if the boy really wants to kill him that badly. Lucius's eyes burn with hatred, revealing the resentment he has carried throughout all those years. A memory from his previous life floods his mind, bringing back all of that man's cruelty. His former identity echoes through his memories as he stares at the presence that defined his life. Lucius clearly remembers Atlas calling him an orphan and saying he was nothing more than a disposable sword. With his face covered in shadows, he remains silent before those bitter memories. He then begins walking across the stone courtyard, slowly closing the distance between himself and his tormentor. In his mind, he promises to make Atlas suffer until he reaches the point of begging for death. Surrounded by blue flames, Lucius reveals that he has spent the last 12 years thinking about nothing but killing him. Atlas responds with complete indifference that he does not even know who the brat standing in front of him is. Lowering his head, Lucius tells him not to worry about that, because he will not have enough time to find out before being completely annihilated. A massive eruption of blue lightning explodes above the arena and crashes directly down on Atlas. The impact destroys the Colosseum floor and opens several craters around the Duke. Even surrounded by debris, Atlas remains completely motionless before that force. Massive chunks of stone begin levitating around them, each one charged with cores of electrical mana. In the stands, the upperclassman is surprised when she realizes Lucius perfectly copies Estelle's aura replication technique. The announcer goes crazy on the microphone, unable to understand how another duel suddenly started after the tournament had already ended. Diving from above at tremendous speed, Lucius guides all the energized stones toward the Duke. A true shower of electrical meteors crashes down on Atlas. With ease, the swordsman splits the first rock in half using nothing but a slash of energy. Atlas continues walking calmly while destroying every projectile that approaches him. Not even the largest stones can get past the precision of his swordsmanship. Suddenly, he looks up and notices a stealthy movement above. Using the debris as a distraction, Lucius descends from a blind angle with his entire body fully charged with mana. In the stands, Lilia is shocked when she recognizes that Lucius is using her own technique. A massive vortex of blue flames and cutting wind forms above the arena. Mastering the technique with impressive precision, Lucius comes crashing down like a comet. He collides with Atlas's guard at full force, creating an enormous flash at the center of the field. In the middle of the impact, Lucius gives a fierce smile, believing he is finally about to break through that defense. Atlas, however, does not even flinch and simply looks at the boy with contempt. The Duke holds back the full weight of the attack, using only the palm of one hand. Desperate to break through the defense, Lucius roars and pours even more mana into the strike. Shockwaves shake the walls of the Colosseum, but Atlas remains firmly in the exact same spot. With a quick movement, the Duke grabs Lucius's fist with overwhelming strength. He completely stops the rotation of the attack and swings the boy through the air without difficulty. Looking at Lucius from up close, Atlas coldly comments that the attack was far too weak. He then calls him pathetic and violently slams him into the ground using only one arm. Before Lucius can even touch the ground, Atlas pulls him back by the neck as crimson lightning gathers around his free hand. A punch lands directly in the boy's chest and releases a powerful wave of energy. Lucius immediately coughs up blood and loses all the air in his lungs. With no strength left to resist, he falls to his knees, completely overwhelmed by the blow. Atlas lifts him by the neck with one hand and begins choking him without showing any mercy. In the stands, Lucius's teammates watch the scene in complete desperation. The nobles also tremble as they witness Atlas's true strength up close. The entire Colosseum falls silent as the white-haired giant keeps Lucius suspended in the air. Looking directly into his eyes, Atlas says contemptuously that he expected more and that Lucius was a huge disappointment. Nearly unconscious and barely able to breathe, the boy remains trapped in that hand. Even so, gathering what little determination he has left, Lucius promises with a fierce glare that he will kill him no matter what. Atlas shows no reaction at all. He simply closes his eyes and prepares the final blow. With a brutal strike, he sends Lucius flying away like a projectile. The boy's body crashes through part of the Colosseum structure and destroys several pillars in a cloud of debris. Lucius lands him on the shattered stones and begins coughing up blood again after the impact. In the boxes, the nobles watch in silence after witnessing the Duke's brutality. Atlas stares coldly at the fallen Lucius without showing any remorse. Silence takes over the arena while the boy remains lying among the debris. His motionless body and blood-covered face make his condition painfully clear. To everyone in the Colosseum, the difference in power between the two has become impossible to ignore. The announcer officially declares the unexpected confrontation over, since Lucius does not seem capable of continuing. The commentator points out that Atlas defeated two powerful fighters within seconds without even drawing his sword. The crowd praises the living legend and celebrates the strength of the leader of the Empire's most powerful family. To everyone's amazement, Atlas did not even need to touch his blade to completely dominate those fights. As the dupe begins walking away, Lucius remains lying among the shattered stones. The commentator even asks if anyone in the Empire is capable of making Atlas draw his sword before declaring the tournament officially over. But suddenly he cuts himself off when he notices something unbelievable happening on the field. Among the debris, Lucius slowly begins standing up as a dense reddish aura boils around his body. Feeling that murderous intent rising behind him once again, Atlas immediately stops walking. The dupe turns with a tense expression as a glowing mark appears on his forehead in response to that presence. Lucius wields a sword formed from pure blue light and takes a classic swordsmanship stance, surrounded by the flames of his fury. Atlas is stunned, unable to understand how that boy knows a stance like that. His eyes remain fixed on Lucius's fighting stance as he recognizes traces of a technique connected to his own past. Lucius stares at his tormentor and provocatively asks if he remembers that stance. Then, in a whisper filled with hatred, he finally speaks the name of his legendary technique, Zetsui.